Chapter 1346. This was probably the stupidest mistake Gohan had ever made in his life. After using up the severed black hair that his daughter had given him, he had successfully severed the victory sword's scar. Due to the huge consumption of his mental power, Gohan, who was in a daze, had forgotten one important thing. When he had enough sword essence, there was a possibility that he could synchronize the sword maiden with the sword maiden in his hand. Most sword wielders would not have such a problem. Or rather, their real problem was that the sword maiden did not react at all when they held it in their hand. If they could synchronize the sword maiden with the sword maiden in their hands, it would be a great fortune for them. However, things were different for Gohan, especially since the victory sword had synchronized with Gohan once before. Therefore, when Gohan held the victory sword in his hands once again, something unexpected happened. Gohan's body began to petrify rapidly, and in the end, he turned into a stone statue. Gohan. This scene shocked all the sword maidens present. They stared dumbly at the petrified Gohan. After a while, Doyu asked weakly, "Big sisters, what's wrong with Big Brother? Is there even a need to look? He's petrified." Etian rolled her eyes. To be more precise, Gohan has entered a synchronized state. Ju Xian rubbed her nose and said with a pained expression, "What's going on?" Qidian's face was full of distress and helplessness. Hubby finally severed the victory sword's scar and won his future freedom. Why is he trapped again? Sister Qidian, take a look and see which sword maiden coordinated with Gohan? Qing Popper jumped out and asked with his eyes wide open. Isn't that obvious? It must be the sword of victory. Etian knocked on Qing Pin's head and mocked him without holding back. The sword of victory has already been synchronized once. It wasn't easy for Gohan to cut off her sword mark, but in the end, he courted death and touched her again. Serves him right for having to synchronize a second time. If you don't believe me, you can touch the victory sword and see if it's petrified. If it's petrified, then it's definitely the victory sword. Qing Pin jumped to Gohan's side and touched the victory sword with her little hand as she said with an innocent look on her face, "It's true! The sword of victory really turned into stone." Master Mod once said that the great Tao is above. Everything in this world has its own destiny. It seems like the sword of victory is destined to be masters, just like how Juzi is destined to be masters. Juzi said her second sentence in these 2 chapters. I'm not worried about whether the sword of victory is destined to be Gohan's. I'm only worried about one thing. Before Qidian could finish her sentence, Qingpin's attention shifted from the sword of victory to the celestial entrapment sword. After touching it, she said in surprise, "Wow! Sister's celestial entrapment sword has also turned into stone. It's over. The worst has happened." Hearing Qingpin's words, Qidian's entire body instantly softened. Other than the simple-minded and ignorant Qingpin and Doyu, when the other sword maidens heard that the celestial entrapment sword had also turned into stone, their expressions immediately changed, and they touched the 2 swords one after another. Oh no! It seems like Gohan is synchronizing with the celestial entrapment sword and the victory sword at the same time. Etian also felt a little dizzy. Thinking about the serious consequences of this matter, her entire body started to heat up and become fearful. Little sister Juexian. Little sister Zhu Xian. Gohan. Gohan has 2 sword maidens at the same time. Gohan. Qidian stuttered for a long time, but in the end, she still did not say what she really wanted to ask. This was because Qidian was afraid of saying this out loud. Once it did, Qidian would immediately collapse. I'm sorry. This time, Gohan. He most likely won't survive. Zhu Xian lowered her head. Although her tone was very calm, no one could see her expression at that moment. Big sister, why are you apologizing? It's not your fault that Gohan is seeking his own death. Juexian looked indifferent. In reality, she did not have much of a relationship with Gohan, and could be considered the weakest among all the sword maidens. He clearly knows that once he synchronizes with two sword maidens who are not twin sisters, it will definitely cause the sword marks in his body to go berserk, and in the end, his purple palace will explode and he will die. Yet, he stupidly touched the celestial entrapment sword and the victory sword at the same time. Isn't he seeking his own death? Juexian's sword shouted. Shut up! When Qi, who was already feeling heartbroken, heard Zhu Xian's words, he immediately roared, Gu Han is already being very careful. Gu Han only did this because he fell into a trance. I forbid you from scolding him. I said so. I said so. Slap. Before Juexian's sword could finish, a slap landed directly on her face. How dare you hit me? How dare you hit me, one of the four immortal swords? Juexian's sword touched her face in disbelief, then suddenly exploded. Juexian's sword immediately appeared in her hand, and she slashed at Qidian's head. F***ck. I'm not afraid of you. Qidian's sword was not afraid, and the Qidian sword in her hand also met the attack head-on. The two swords collided in the air. Qidian and Juexian's sword came out in a rage, and completely exploded with their strongest power. The entire room could not withstand the aftermath of such a violent collision, and an entire wall was directly knocked down, revealing the restaurant on the other side of the wall. Fortunately, because Gohan was synchronizing, there was no sword essence mixed in. Otherwise, if Qidian and Juexian's sword fought with all their might, the entire restaurant would probably be reduced to nothing. Enough, Juexian, if anything happens to Gohan, we will all be finished. This world will be completely hopeless. Do you want to see the four of us sisters smashed into pieces? Now is not the time for you to rejoice in our misfortune. Juexian's sword snatched Juexian's sword from Juexian's sword's hand, and then directly slapped Juexian's sword's face. The sound was loud, even louder than Qidian's slap. I was wrong. After being slapped by her own sister, Juexian's sword came to its senses, and lowered its head to admit its mistake. Sister Juexian, we can only rely on you now. Do you have any ideas? Is there any way to save Gohan? Qidian walked to Juexian's sword's side, and was about to kneel down and beg Juexian's sword. Juexian's sword reacted quickly and hugged Qidian, then shook its head helplessly. I really don't have any ideas. If there was really a way to help Gohan, I would not hesitate to give my life to Gohan. After all, when we betrayed the old master, we already gave up our lives. How could this be? Qidian's sword heard Juexian's sword's words, and became extremely helpless. I have an idea. I have an idea. Etian, who was also anxious, suddenly shouted excitedly. Hearing Etian's words, Qidian and the other sword ladies immediately surrounded Etian and asked her if she had any ideas. The thing that exploded was Gohan's purple palace, right? The purple palace is in Gohan's upper body, right? Actually, Gohan's head won't be in any danger, right? Etian said excitedly. If we take advantage of the instant Gohan's synchronization is successful, and the few seconds before his purple palace explodes, and cut off Gohan's head and put it in the medical pod, then Gohan won't have to die. As soon as Etian said this idea, all the sword ladies present fell silent. This idea was simply too wild and imaginative. They would need to spend some time to properly accept this idea. This idea might be able to save Gohan's life for a while, and through the medical pod, Big Brother's body can indeed recover, but what will happen then? Doyu's little face scrunched up together as she asked. The destruction of the Purple Palace is irreversible. Once the Purple Palace is destroyed, even if the body recovers tens of thousands of times, the Purple Palace will no longer exist, and Gohan will lose his Purple Palace forever. Qidian's sword answered after a moment of silence. Then, what will happen to the 8 of us without the Purple Palace? Doyu asked again. We will return to our original form. Qidian's sword said calmly. We will return to being swords, fall into a deep sleep, and wait for the next sword wielder. Then, I don't want to. Du immediately shook her head and strongly refused. Guyun finally got to live with Big Brother again. Guyun wants to be with Big Brother forever. Guyun really wants to give birth to Big Brother's children. Guyun will never return to being a sword that can't do anything. Guyun also doesn't want to be the sword lady of another sword wielder. Be good. As long as Gohan's life can be saved, that's more important than anything else. Actually, I'm the same as you. I won't be able to accept any other sword wielder in the future, so let us fall into a deep sleep forever. Chidian's sword touched Doyu's little face, then ordered Juzi, who was behind it. Juzi, time is of the essence now. We don't know when Gohan will end the synchronization. Go find Miss Lucihua immediately and bring her medical pod here. Quick. Juzi nodded and immediately left to carry out the order. Not long after, she returned with the medical pod and placed it next to Gohan. Next is the most important thing. When Gohan wakes up, who will cut off Gohan's head? Chidian's sword looked around at the rest of the sword ladies. None of them said anything. It was obvious that they did not want to do this. Then let me do it myself. Chidian's sword let out a long sigh. At the same time, it once again held the Chidian's sword tightly in its hand. Using its own sword to cut off its lover's head was something that Chidian's sword had never imagined. What are you guys doing? Stop being so noisy. Poverty, who had been lying on Gohan's petrified body and treating Gohan as a playful toy, looked at the domineering and despairing Chiohan in front of him and asked in confusion. Chapter 1347. When Ching Popper finished his sentence, Gohan, who had been petrified all this time, began to move. His skin was no longer the pale color of stone, but a pinkish blood color began to appear. Everyone get ready. Chidian took a deep breath and nervously gripped the hilt of his sword. He closed his eyes and placed one hand under Gohan's nose. Once Gohan regained his breath, Chidian would cut off Gohan's head. Suddenly, Chidian's finger felt a slight itch, and the tiny hairs on it began to flutter. The time had come. Forgive me, Gohan. 2 teardrops rolled down from the corner of Chidian's eyes, and the sword in his hand slashed towards Gohan's neck without hesitation. If Chidian's sword really landed on the unsuspecting Gohan's neck, then Gohan's head would really be separated from his body. At this critical moment, when the sword was less than 0.01 meters away from Gohan's neck, there was a crisp sound of the sword, and Chidian took a dozen steps back. Ition caught him from behind. What? Are you trying to murder Master? A woman in white stood in front of Gohan, frowning, and said in an imposing Ling manner, Today, I will get rid of this evil for Master. I will kill you sword ladies who dare to rebel against your superiors. What a valiant and heroic heroine. It was a pity that she did not maintain her heroic image for long before she was forcefully held in someone's arms. She wailed, My little sister, I'm not your little sister. My good little sister trapping immortal, we finally meet. Whoa, big sister missed you so much. As Ju Xian cried, she wiped the tears on her face on the heroine's chest, soaking her white feather robe. Let me go. Stay away from me. You're not allowed to come near me. However, the heroine did not have the slightest awareness of being a younger sister, nor did she cry like Ju Xian. Instead, she pushed Ju Xian's head, trying her best to push him away from her embrace. Get out of my way, you two. If you don't let me save Gohan, it'll be too late. Chidian came back to its senses and roared in sorrow. It picked up its Chidian sword, and was about to cut off Gohan's head again. Alright. I'm fine. Don't even think about hitting my head. In the next second, Gohan's voice rang out from behind the celestial captive sword. Then, he walked out unsteadily. Although Gohan's complexion didn't look good, his other aspects were still normal. There were no signs of his body breaking down. Husband. It's great that you're alright. Woo woo woo. Chidian threw the Chidian sword in its hand away and threw itself into Gohan's embrace, crying unrestrainedly. For the past 10 minutes, A huge amount of pressure had been piling up in Qi heart. Now that everything had come to an end, Qi had completely let go of herself, and all the tears that had accumulated in her heart gushed out. Alright. I didn't even blame you for wanting to cut off my head, so why are you crying? Gohan smiled as he wiped away the tears at the corner of Qi eyes. After hearing Gohan's words, Qi felt even more ashamed, and its face became even more ashamed. And thank you, Lady Captive Immortal, if it wasn't for you, my head would have been separated from my body. Fleeting Maple patted the celestial captive sword beside him with a smile. Protect Master. This is the duty of the celestial captive sword, and I dare not accept Master's praise. The celestial captive sword replied respectfully. This celestial captive sword is completely different from her sisters. Gohan could not help but exclaim in his heart when he saw the celestial captive sword's reaction. The celestial extinguished sword was like a bomb buried beside him, and he did not know when it would explode. While the celestial bane sword was slightly better than the celestial extinguished sword, it was extremely indifferent. It was not to say that it was perfunctory towards Gohan, but it was simply to complete its own task. It was definitely not loyal or professional. Compared to these two masters, the immortal trapping sword sisters were completely different when they appeared. They gave off a sense of loyalty and trust. They were all twins, but why was there such a huge difference? Heartless fellow. You don't even want your own sister now that you have a man. The celestial extinguish sword grumbled unhappily. Gohan, what's going on? Why are you completely fine? Didn't you say that if you are unable to synchronize your two sisters, your mind palace will explode and you will die? Qi asked curiously. I also don't know why. Gohan smiled bitterly and said, but the fact is that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are now in my mind palace, and there is no conflict between them. Otherwise, I would rather you cut off my head. Alright. Then let's not care about these things for now. Qi shook its head and threw aside the questions that it could not understand. At the same time, it wiped away the tears on its face and put on a curious expression and asked, Gohan, you said that the victory sword and the celestial captive sword's sword mark are in your mind palace. Then what about the victory sword? Where is she now? Why is she not out? I am here. Can't you see me? Gohan replied. What do you mean, husband? Why don't I understand? Qi felt that there were more than 10 crows flying over its head at the same time. It could not understand what Gohan meant at all. I am here. Gohan smiled and said, Isn't the victory sword you were asking about here? What? It wasn't just Qi. All the sword maidens present felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. Who gave you the right to pretend to be me? At that moment, a hand grabbed Gohan's shoulder from behind and pulled Gohan back. At the same time, a pale Gohan appeared from behind Gohan. Nice to meet you all. I'm very sorry to have played a small joke on you all. Let me introduce myself. I am the victory sword, but I hope that everyone will call me Guxuan Yuan. The victory sword stood in front of the sword ladies and said with a smile. Two big brothers. Doyu was frightened by the victory sword's appearance, and said with a trembling body. In fact, in this room, other than the 4 immortal banishing swords and Qing Pin, all the sword ladies in the room looked confused. I am not the big brother. I am the big sister. The victory sword stroked his hair with both hands, and his short hair, which was the same as Gohan's, instantly turned into long, black hair. His flat chest also began to expand rapidly, and finally became the size of a D-cup. Although the victorious sword's appearance was still the same as before, she seemed to have transformed into a beautiful and adorable girl with her long hair and voluptuous breast. Isn't this your transformation, husband transformation? Qi stuttered, unable to finish his sentence. That's right. This is the appearance of a woman that I became because of the side effects of the 6 transformations immortal pill. This is Gu Xuan Yuan. There were also a few crows circling above Gu Han's head. Gu Han had never thought that the Sword of Victory would actually become like this after it was synchronized. Silence. The entire room was silent. When the sword ladies saw the male and female Gu Han appear in front of them, after the initial shock, their cheeks puffed up and their faces were filled with smiles that were on the verge of bursting out. If not for the fact that Gu Han's expression was not good, these sword ladies would have laughed maniacally. Laugh if you want. Even if you don't laugh today, you will still laugh tomorrow. As long as you are happy. Gu Han waved his hand, as if he could not bear to see his sword ladies continue to hold back their laughter. Ha 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 ha. In the next second, the entire room was filled with deafening laughter. All the sword ladies, including Qi Dian, were laughing so hard that they almost went crazy. Tell me about it. Why did you turn into me? After the deafening laughter in the room ended, Gu Han looked at Victory Sword, who was also laughing and chatting non-stop. He did not feel that he was one of the protagonists being mocked. Master, you are too heartless. You didn't apologize to me first, and you want me to explain so many things to you. I am not happy. The Victory Sword pouted and said coquettishly. At the same time, there was a hint of seduction. Seeing a woman who looked almost identical to him showing a flirtatious expression, Gu Han was very calm, and he did not seem to be disturbed at all. If you are talking about my intention to cut off your sword mark, then I apologize to you. However, I have already told you about my situation. If I do not cut off your sword mark, I will die. I hope you can understand, Gu Han said calmly. His words did not sound like he was apologizing. Forget it. I can't be bothered to argue with you. The Victory Sword rolled her eyes at Gu Han. Master, don't tell me you have forgotten the first time you synchronized with me. Of course I remember. Gu Han nodded. At that time, I took a little bit of the 6 transformations elixir and reached the level of a celestial sword wielder in a short 5 seconds. Then, I borrowed your strength to kill Hela. However, because it was only 5 seconds, you returned to your sword form. Bingo! The Victory Sword snapped her fingers and said, however, you forgot to mention one thing. After the synchronization was successful, there was still my half-developed embryo left in your body. It was not just a sword mark. Then, you took the whole 6 transformations elixir in one go and gave birth to the body of Gu Xian Yuan, right? Then, you borrowed the strength of the Xian Yuan sword granny to become Gu Xian Yuan and defeat the Nether River Patriarch, right? That's right. Gu Han nodded again. Do you think that body of Gu Xian Yuan came for nothing? The Victory Sword snorted coldly. Actually, that was my embryo that had not formed yet. It was just that the Xian Yuan sword granny forcefully developed and transformed it into Gu Xian Yuan. Then, this body merged with your bloodline. This is the origin of Gu Xian Yuan's identity. Gu Xian Yuan is me, and I am Gu Xian Yuan. Understood. Gu Han nodded. So, the culprit was the Xian Yuan sword granny. Chapter 1348. Little sister, let's be reasonable. I'm obviously your good sister. I don't care even if I'm your good sister, but how can you call me grandma? This is wrong. Before Gu Han could summon the Xian Yuan sword, the Xian Yuan sword jumped out of the dimensional pocket and said to the Victory Sword with great dissatisfaction. I'm not wrong. Mother is mother, I'm mother's mother, so of course, Xian Yuan sword is your grandma. The Victory Sword's words made sense, and the Xian Yuan sword was speechless. It could only keep waving its sword in the air and threaten, okay. You'll tear the tiles if you're not beaten for 3 days. Let's see how I deal with this unfilial granddaughter. That's good. I also want to settle the score with you. If you didn't play tricks on my embryo, how could I become like this? I'm an immortal sword lady, and you're an emperor's sword without a master. Do you think I'll be afraid of you? The victory sword said, not to be outdone. Enough, all of you shut up. Gohan suppressed all the quarrels with one sentence. He then controlled the angry Xian Yuan sword in his hand and asked with a cold face, "Did you already expect what happened today? You already knew that Gu Xuanyuan's body is actually the body of the victory sword." "You can't say that." The Xian Yuan sword snorted. "Gu Xuanyuan's body is actually your body. To put it bluntly, Gu Xuanyuan's body is still separated from your body. Otherwise, how could she look exactly the same as you? Your bodies are actually the same. Even if you go to test your DNA now, except for the X and Y chromosomes, all your chromosomes are exactly the same. How should I put it? You're the closest pair of twin brother and sister, a dragon and a phoenix. Twin brother and sister." Hearing the Xian Yuan sword's words, Gohan's face became a little better. Twin brother and sister was already the best result. It was better than two Gohans. Also, I'm taking this matter seriously now. I'm filled with righteous indignation. I'm furious. I'm going to perish together with you. I'm telling you, you shouldn't blame me for this matter. Instead, you should thank me. Otherwise, you would have already died from the explosion of your purple palace. It could be seen that the Xian Yuan sword was really in a bad mood. Otherwise, it wouldn't have thrown out so many idioms. What do you mean? Gohan's expression became tense. If I hadn't shattered the embryo of the victory sword and fused it with your body, how could you have prevented the celestial trapping sword and the victory sword's sword scar from not reacting? It's because the embryo of the victory sword has mixed with your own flesh and blood to become the body of the victory sword. Therefore, the victory sword is the same as the Qidian sword. In terms of origin, it has already fused with your body. You are the twin brother and sister of the Qidian sword. That's why the sword scar of the celestial trapping sword didn't have any reaction to the sword scar of the victory sword. Because she thinks that the sword scar of the victory sword is a part of your Zifu, she doesn't know the existence of the victory sword. I see. Gohan nodded. He believed that the Xian Yuan sword wouldn't lie to him about this. At the same time, he understood why the victory sword could live in harmony with the sword mark of the celestial captive sword. Wait, Grandma Xian Yuan's sword. This means that even if Gohan didn't use the green sever silk, he wouldn't have to worry about the victory sword. So, this precious green sever silk was wasted just like that. The heavenly sword said with a pained expression. Oh my God, how much could one green sever silk be sold for? How much red star erguotu could I buy with this money? It's all gone, oh, it's all gone. Don't worry. Even if Gohan sold the green sever silk, he wouldn't buy you red star erguotu. The celestial extinguished sword said, while pinching the heavenly sword's butt. Don't call me grandma. Otherwise I'll kill you. The heavenly sword didn't even have time to get angry at the celestial extinguished sword before the Xian Yuan sword roared angrily. The victory sword immediately shrunk its head and didn't dare to say anything else. It was 2 against 1 and they were both emperor swords. It really couldn't win. Also, this green sever silk wasn't wasted. Don't forget, the sword mark left in the purple palace wasn't the sword mark after the embryo fused. It was the sword mark left after the victory sword and Gohan synchronized for the first time. In fact, it was the original sword mark of the victory sword. If the celestial trap sword's sword mark saw the original sword mark, there would be a fierce battle. By then, Gohan, your purple palace would still be finished. The Xian Yuan sword said with a humph. Alright, I understand what you're trying to say. Gohan nodded and said, Now, please go back to your rooms. I'm sleepy. I want to sleep. After Gohan said this, he collapsed on the bed and fell asleep. Gohan was really too tired. When Gohan slept until the sun was high up in the sky and he still wanted more, a hurried doorbell woke Gohan up. Great Sun Sword Immortal! What a rare guest! Why are you looking for me so early in the morning? Gohan, who was wearing pajamas, opened the door and saw an anxious great sun sword immortal standing at his door. He looked like he wanted to eat Gohan up. "Your Majesty, let me ask you something. You must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yanjing city for thousands of years," the great sun sword immortal said hurriedly. He squeezed into the room, and then he was stunned. "I say, Your Majesty, did you have a big fight with your 8 sword maidens yesterday? Why did the walls collapse?" The great sun sword immortal looked at the half-collapsed wall in front of him and said in a daze. This broken wall was actually the result of the clash between the Qi Dian sword and the celestial extinguishing sword yesterday. Of course, Gohan could not tell the great sun sword immortal the truth. He only said lightly, "Yesterday, I comprehended some sword techniques while thinking hard. I could not control the vigorous sword Qi, and accidentally leaked some of it out. When the time comes, the walls of this hotel will be destroyed. But don't worry, great sun sword immortal. If you are here for this broken wall, I will pay all the repair fees to you. I promise not to damage Yanjing City's official business." No, it's just a broken wall, who cares? The great sun sword immortal quickly waved his hands. He did not even know that the wall was damaged. How could he have come to find Gohan because of this wall? "Then why is great Sun Jiandi here?" Gohan said with a smile. Actually, looking at the great sun sword immortal's anxious expression, Gohan had already guessed what the great sun sword immortal wanted to do. This was also within Gohan's expectations. "Your Majesty, I have a question that you must answer me honestly. This concerns the glory and future of our Yanjing city for thousands of years," the great sun sword immortal said anxiously. "Stop." Gohan pressed the great sun sword immortal down. "Lord Sword Immortal, this is the second time you've said this. If you have something to say, say it. I am from Yuzhong City. Yanjing City's glory and future have never had anything to do with our Yuzhong City. Brother Gohan, you're treating me like an outsider. Our Yanjing City and Yuzhong City are one. Everyone's glory and future are together. Don't say such things that make people doubt your status," the great sun sword immortal said with a smile. "I say, Lord Sword Immortal, what do you want to say? Say it now, don't beat around the bush with me. I'm still sleepy. If there's nothing else, I'm going back to sleep." Gohan's face showed signs of impatience. "All right, then I'll say it." The great sun sword immortal gritted his teeth. "This morning, His Majesty Longsure told me that when you were in London, Your Majesty snuck into the Glastonbury stronghold of the Martyr's Palace and obtained a portion of the innate sword ladies that the traitor stole from Yanjing City's sword garret. Is this true?" The great sun sword immortal finally asked the question that had been hidden in his heart. This was indeed the most important thing to Yanjing City. Since the rebellion 2 years ago, Yanjing City's reputation had hit rock bottom. Nearly a tenth of the innate sword ladies had been stolen from the sword garret by a traitor. This was the greatest humiliation Yanjing City had ever suffered in the past 1,000 years. If not for Hao Tianjiandi, who was still alive and well, supporting Great Sun Sword Immortal, the Great Sun Sword Immortal might have already resigned from his position as the chairman of the Yanjing City Sword Committee. He might even become the greatest sinner of Yanjing City and be cursed by countless descendants. Thus, these lost innate sword ladies had always been a huge boulder on Great Sun Sword Immortal's chest. For the past 2 years, the Great Sun Sword Immortal had been unable to breathe. The Great Sun Sword Immortal sent out almost all of the elite sword bearers in Yanjing City to gather information about the missing natural sword ladies. In the end, they really did find something. The Great Sun Sword Immortal personally took action and captured a universe-grade bandit from the Martyr's Palace. From him, he found out that the missing natural sword ladies were in the Glastonbury stronghold. But after hearing this news, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was in despair. Glastonbury was the most important stronghold of the Martyr's Palace in the human world, guarded by 3 flood-grade Yuan Ko. If Hao Tianjiendi hadn't weakened, then with the power of 2 Jiendi, it might have been possible to break through the defenses of the Glastonbury stronghold and take back the lost innate sword ladies. But Hao Tianjiendi had already fallen into a weakened state, and Long Shi Jiendi was particularly stingy with his power. He was unwilling to agree to Yanjing City's request, and there had been no progress in the past 2 years. The great Sun Sword Immortal had reached the end of his patience. He planned to gather all the immortal-grade sword-bearers in Yanjing City together, and then use some of Yanjing City's trump cards to enter the Glastonbury stronghold. Even if he had to sacrifice the lives of 5 or 6 immortal-grade sword-bearers, he had to rescue the innate sword ladies. Otherwise he, the great Sun Sword Immortal, would not die in peace. Chapter 1349. Well, the item is indeed with me, Gohan said with a conflicted and hesitant expression. When the great Sun Sword Immortal heard Gohan's words, he heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that Gohan wouldn't admit that the natural sword ladies were with Gohan. This was because only Gohan and Li Bai knew about Gohan's infiltration of the Glastonbury outpost. Li Bai was with Gohan. If Gohan insisted that he didn't get anything from the outpost, then the great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't have any evidence to prove that the item was with Gohan. Perhaps when the time came, Yuenko of the Martyr's Palace would jump out and say that Gohan had stolen those natural sword ladies, but as long as Gohan insisted that this was Yuenko's ploy, purposely to sow discord between him and Yanjing City, and incite civil strife among humans, then the great Sun Sword Immortal would still have no evidence to prove this. So if Gohan didn't admit it, the great Sun Sword Immortal really wouldn't be able to do anything. Now that Gohan had admitted it, it was easy. Actually, the great Sun Sword Immortal already had 3 cameras on him to record his conversation with Gohan. This would be used as evidence in the future. As long as Gohan admitted it now, it would be irrefutable evidence. Gohan wouldn't be able to deny it even if he wanted to. That's great. That's great. Your Majesty, please return the item to us. A few drops of tears flowed from the corner of the great Sun Sword Immortal's eyes. He then stretched out his empty hand and placed it in front of Gohan. Return what to you? Gohan looked confused. This made the great Sun Sword Immortal's heart clench. He immediately said nervously, "Of course it's the natural sword ladies that your Majesty saved. These natural sword ladies originally belonged to Yanjing City. Naturally, they should be returned to their rightful owners." So that's how it is. Gohan nodded, and a playful smile appeared on his face. You people from Yanjing City really have a good plan. You want to ask me to take the things away without any evidence? You can't do this, right? I understand. The great Sun Sword Immortal's face revealed a hint of bitterness. It seemed like his initial plan to take back the item without paying anything had been a little too good. Gohan had taken the item back, and he had not done anything in return. That was indeed a little too petty. Forget it, since the responsibility is on me, I'll settle it myself. Therefore, the great Sun Sword Immortal said solemnly and righteously, Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's great kindness, I, the great Sun Sword Immortal, will never forget. From now on, Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor's matters are my matters. Even if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor, wants my life, I will not dare to disobey. From now on, if Your Majesty, the Sea Emperor has any orders, as long as I, the great Sun Sword Immortal, am still alive, I will definitely not refuse. The great Sun Sword Immortal's words sounded righteous and unyielding, as if he was offering himself up to the Sea Emperor. But in reality, the great Sun Sword Immortal knew very well that these were just words that sounded nice. Did Gohan have the guts to order him around, to make him, the chairman of the Yanjing City Sword Committee, work for him with his life on the line? This kind of thing might happen once or twice, but if it happened too many times, not to mention what kind of discussions it would cause in society, even Gohan himself would feel embarrassed. Therefore, the great Sun Sword Immortal believed that Gohan would not give him too many orders. It was even possible that he would not give any orders at all. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was because Gohan's strength was too high. As a spiritual sword-level sword wielder, he was only second to an Emperor sword-level sword wielder. From the looks of it, it would be a piece of cake for Gohan to become an immortal sword-level sword wielder. And when Gohan became an immortal sword, his strength would probably be comparable to an Emperor sword-level sword wielder. Although he was the strongest among the immortal sword-level sword wielder, compared to Gohan's strength, there was already a huge gap. If he could do it, so could Gohan. There was no need for him to trouble him. And if even Gohan could not do it, then it was even more impossible for him to do it. Gohan would not use this kind of thing to make things difficult for him. Therefore, although the great Sun Sword Immortal's words sounded very beautiful, they did not mean much. The great Sun Sword Immortal felt that he would at most be ordered around by Gohan once or twice. Such a simple condition in exchange for all the natural sword ladies. No matter how you looked at it, it was a good deal. Moreover, this also sounded very prestigious. The dignified chairman of the Yanjing City Sword Committee took the initiative to give himself to envoy Gohan. How much face did he give to Gohan? After hearing this condition, shouldn't he happily return the things to him? Unfortunately, the great Sun Sword Immortal was wrong. Because Gohan was not someone who would be fooled by such superficial things. What the great Sun Sword Immortal could think of, how could it be hidden from Gohan's eyes? There's no need to say more. This doesn't mean much to me. To put it bluntly, I don't think much of the great Sun Sword Immortal's ability. Gohan said indifferently. And this unceremonious and merciless sentence made the great Sun Sword Immortal's face turn as black as a large piece of rag. Your Majesty, what do you mean? The great Sun Sword Immortal said darkly. Great Sun Sword Immortal, do you not understand what I mean? Should I say it directly? Gohan looked at the great Sun Golden Immortal's clothes, which were decorated with many transparent gems, and smiled. If I say the truth, it won't be good if it's recorded in a video. This guy knows I have a video camera on me. The great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. At the same time, his body felt a little cold. In order to hide the small video camera on him, he had specially chosen this set of clothes with all kinds of gems. He did not expect that Gohan would see through it. However, the great Sun Sword Immortal was not willing to be attacked by Gohan just like that. Right now, Gohan was still a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, and he was still an immortal sword rank sword wielder. He did not believe that his strength was really useless against Gohan. Your Majesty, I may not be as strong as Your Majesty, but I'm sure there's a limit to the difference. Your Majesty, please have a try with me. If my strength is really too far from Your Majesty's, then I won't dare to shamelessly say that I can help Your Majesty. Great Sun Sword Immortal said. Interesting. Gohan revealed a playful smile. Then may I ask, Great Sun Sword Immortal, what kind of difference would be considered limited? This. The great Sun Sword Immortal was a little hesitant. It was easy to say this, but it was difficult to put it into practice. The great Sun Sword Immortal really did not know what kind of difference would be considered limited. The book did not mention how much difference there was between an immortal sword rank and a spiritual sword rank sword wielder. No, the book did mention it, but it said that an immortal sword rank sword wielder was much stronger than a spiritual sword rank sword wielder, but it did not say how much stronger a spiritual sword rank sword wielder would be compared to an immortal sword wielder. At this thought, the great Sun Sword Immortal felt his face burning. He was probably the first immortal sword wielder in history to think about the difference in strength between him and a spiritual sword wielder. But the great Sun Sword Immortal had no choice but to consider this question. Because when they had attacked Gohan on the street, although all the immortal sword bearers had held back and not used their true strength, they had still used at least 50% of their strength. From that moment on, the great Sun Sword Immortal knew that he was no match for Guhan. Sir, you've thought for so long, it's time for you to give me an answer. Guhan's voice urged in the great Sun Sword Immortal's ear. 3 to 1 hour. If I can last an hour against your Majesty the Sea King, then it means that your Majesty the Sea King and I aren't too far apart in strength. What do you think, your Majesty the Sea King? The great Sun Sword Immortal said through gritted teeth. Under normal circumstances, it was normal for two immortal sword wielder to fight for 3 days and 3 nights. But in his own words, there was only 1 hour left. Although this was said by the great Sun Sword Immortal himself, the great Sun Sword Immortal still felt very ashamed. 1 hour. Guhan's expression became non-committal. Even a week ago, if he used all his strength, the great Sun Sword Immortal would not be able to last an hour, let alone now. Sir, I've just crawled out of bed, and you want me to fight you? That's a little inappropriate. How about this? I'll show you something. After you see it, if you think it's about the same as mine, then I'll fight you. Guhan said with a smile. All right. Although the great Sun Sword Immortal did not know what Guhan had up his sleeve, he still agreed readily. Guhan smiled and nodded. Today, I'll invite the great Sun Sword Immortal to have a look at my sword maidens. As Guhan spoke, he clapped his hands. From all the rooms in the presidential suite flew out blinding rays of sword light. When all the sword lights stopped, the great Sun Sword Immortal realized that there were sword maidens floating beside Guhan. This Guhan, why is he showing off his sword maidens now? The great Sun Sword Immortal muttered. With an awkward smile, he said to Guhan, Your Majesty, I know you have a lot of sword maidens. You don't have to take them out to embarrass me. No, I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just want you to count how many sword maidens I have. Guhan smiled. What's there to count? Everyone in this world knows that your Majesty has 8 sword maidens. The great Sun Sword Immortal said, confused. Count them. It's not too late to count before you speak. Guhan squinted his eyes and said. This, all right. The great Sun Sword Immortal was helpless. Since Guhan had requested this, he could only do as he was told. Then he carefully looked at the sword maidens floating in front of him, and then beads of sweat covered the great Sun Sword Immortal's face. Chapter 1350. 10. It's 10. When the great Sun Sword Immortal counted the number of sword maidens floating beside Guhan, his forehead was covered in sweat. If he had not known that Guhan was the wielder of the dual sword maidens, the great Sun Sword Immortal would have thought that Guhan had broken through the heavens and surpassed the 6 sword maidens of an emperor sword wielder. He had reached a level that no one had ever reached before. But now Guhan had 10 sword maidens. What did this mean? Didn't this mean that Guhan was already a celestial sword wielder? The great Sun Sword Immortal started to wipe the sweat off his forehead. He had thought that he could last an hour against Guhan. Now that Guhan was a celestial sword wielder, he might not even last 5 minutes, let alone an hour. Guhan was right. He was not attractive to Guhan at all now. If the situation was dangerous to the point where Guhan needed his help, then he would only be sending himself to his death. The reason was simple. If it was an opponent that Guhan could not defeat, then he would only be sending himself to his death. Thinking of this, the great Sun Sword Immortal's previous words were all for naught. The great Sun Sword Immortal carefully calculated his trump card, and sadly found that he didn't even have a single condition that could attract Guhan. What was worse was that even if he did not hold back and let all the immortal sword-rank sword-bearers in Yanjing City act to forcefully threaten Guhan, considering the strength of both sides, unless the Clear Sky Sword Emperor also acted, it was likely that all the immortal sword-rank sword-bearers in Yanjing City would not be able to defeat Guhan. Not to mention that the state of the Clear Sky Sword Emperor was extremely bad. His lifespan was on the verge of death, and he could die at any time. After this fight, the Clear Sky Sword Emperor would probably die in advance. More importantly, this would trigger the biggest internal strife in human history in Yanjing City, and the entire Yanjing City would become the culprit of destroying human harmony. The Great Sun Sword Immortal would not do such a thing. Even if he did not want these natural sword maidens, he would not fight Gohan. But the problem was, what trump card did he have to make a deal with Gohan? The only thing that reassured the Great Sun Sword Immortal was that while Gohan's words were very displeasing, he could see that Gohan still wanted to negotiate. This meant that Gohan actually had some thoughts and was willing to return the natural sword maidens to Yanjing City. This was what Yanjing City had to fight for. But in this way, the control of the entire negotiation was completely in the hands of Gohan. All Yanjing City could do was to passively accept Gohan's request. They didn't even have the right to refuse. Great Sun Sword Immortal, why aren't you saying anything? Do you still want to spar with me? Gohan asked slyly. I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare. The Great Sun Sword Immortal waved his hands. At the same time, he sighed in his heart. As the chairman of Yanjing City's Sword Committee, when did he become so cowardly? Yuzhong City's luck was too good. 100 years ago they had just produced the powerful Gu Jin Jiendi. Now, an even more terrifying Jiendi Gohan was about to appear. What was going on? Thinking of this, the Great Sun Sword Immortal unconsciously glanced at the 10 sword maidens floating beside Gohan. His entire body trembled. A terrifying thought suddenly appeared in his mind. With 2 more sword maidens, this Gohan had already ascended to the throne. Who knew? Thus, the Great Sun Sword Immortal asked weakly, Your Majesty, what level of sword wielder are you now? Great Sun Sword Immortal, you worry too much. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal's slightly panicked expression, Gohan said calmly, I have less than 10 million quarks in my body. I'm not fated to become the Honorable Emperor Sword Maidens. That's good. No. That's great. Your Majesty, it seems like you can control 2 Emperor Sword Maidens at the same time. Your might will shake the world and surpass Shitian. It's only a matter of time. Poor Great Sun Sword Immortal. Even his words became careful. He even had to flatter Gohan against his will, afraid that his words would anger Gohan. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal's aggrieved expression, Gohan also knew that he could not put on too much of a show. If he continued acting like this, it would cause great indignation in Yanjing City. This would not be harmonious for the future of humanity. Alright, actually, I was planning to return these natural sword maidens to Yanjing City. It's just that I've encountered so many things along the way. I feel a little aggrieved, so I have no choice but to put on a show, Gohan said with a smile, and this sentence made the Great Sun Sword Immortal feel much more at ease. Next, as long as he obediently accepted Gohan's conditions, these natural sword maidens that Yanjing City had lost could all be returned. Your Majesty, please tell me what you want. The main thing is that I will give you whatever Yanjing City can give you. The Great Sun Sword Immortal hurriedly expressed his stance. Since all the initiative was in Gohan's hands, he might as well do Gohan a favor. Perhaps he could make Gohan feel guilty and lower his own conditions. First, the Sword Committee will be re-elected next year, right? Gohan said with a smile. Yes. The Sword Committee is re-elected every 5 years. Each time, the Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens vote to choose the committee chairman and secretary. The Immortal and Emperor Sword Maidens have 1 vote, and the Emperor Sword Maidens have 5 votes. The current chairman of the Sword Committee is Yanjing City's Hao Tianjiendi. However, Hao Tianjiendi's body condition is too bad. He will not be re-elected. So this time, the chairman should be Long Shijiendi. The Great Sun Sword Immortal nodded and said. At the same time, his heart moved. Could it be that Gohan wanted the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee? The position of chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one, either. After all, the 8 base cities were decided by the Sword Committee of the 8 base cities. The Sword Committee could only offer suggestions on macro control and had no right to intervene in the specific affairs of the base cities. As for other major events that needed to be decided by the Sword Committee and were related to the whole human race, they couldn't be decided by the President alone. They needed to be discussed and decided by the Sword Committee. From this point of view, the President of the Sword Committee was more like a beautiful vase. However, it would be a big mistake to say that the Chairman of the Sword Committee was not a good one. The Chairman of the Sword Committee was the highest leader of the human race in name. It was equivalent to the President of the United States or the Chairman of the Celestial Empire. It was the highest position in the entire human race. Regardless of whether this position had the right or not, to be able to sit in this position was the greatest honor in the world. Not only could he boast for the rest of his life, his descendants could boast for 10 lifetimes. Although all the orders of the Sword Committee were decided by the members of the Sword Committee, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto. In other words, if the Sword Committee felt that this matter was wrong, even if the other sword holders agreed, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to veto it. Moreover, when there was a crisis that concerned the future of the human race, the Sword Committee had the power to force the 8 base cities to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. All the resources and manpower of the 8 base cities would be allocated to the Sword Committee. For example, during the Battle of the Alps, the Sword Committee was in charge of all the resources and sword-bearers of the 8 base cities. Even the Emperor's sword-bearers had to listen to the orders of the Sword Committee unconditionally. That was how they managed to work together and avoid a huge crisis for the human race. Once the human race was in a very passive situation and needed someone to decide, the chairman of the Sword Committee had the right to gather all the decision-making power in his hands. Without any discussion, he could directly command the human race according to his own orders and will. When that time came, the chairman of the Sword Committee would be the most powerful person in the human race. He could directly control the fate of every human. In general, the chairman of the Sword Committee was usually just for show. Sometimes, he could be a troublemaker, but at the most crucial time, he could become the supreme existence in the world. All along, other than a few times, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been monopolized by the Emperor's sword holders in Yanjing City. The reason was simple. The number of immortal-level sword wielders in Yanjing City was usually the highest among the 8 base cities. As long as Yanjing City did not cause public anger among the 8 base cities, it was extremely easy to push their Emperor's sword wielders to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee through voting rights. For example, since the death of the powerful Gu Jinjiandi, the position of chairman of the Sword Committee had been held by 2 generations of Emperor sword holders in Yanjing City for close to 70 years. This was the second longest continuous holding in history. The Great Sun Sword Immortal wanted to break the record of 170 consecutive years when the Sword Committee was established. He didn't expect Gohan to use this as a bargaining chip to threaten him. His Majesty the Sea King wants Yanjing City to support His Majesty to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. The Great Sun Sword Immortal decided to go all out. Anyway, it would take at least 5 years for Gohan to ascend to the throne. After 5 years, no one in the world would be Gohan's match. Then, even if he didn't vote for Gohan, Gohan would still be able to ascend to the position of Emperor Sword Holders. Yanjing City actually didn't suffer too much. Thus, the Great Sun Sword Immortal gritted his teeth and said, "Okay. If His Majesty the Sea King wants it, then as long as His Majesty ascends to the throne, Yanjing City will definitely support His Majesty the Sea King to take over as chairman of the Sword Committee. His Majesty the Sea King will definitely be able to ascend to the position." Wrong. Gohan shook his head. "It's not waiting for me to become an Emperor sword holder. It's going to happen next year. Whatever sword holder I will be next year, You have to support my person to ascend to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee. Chapter 1351. Your Majesty, why do I not understand what you're saying? The great Sun Sword Immortal asked dumbly after hearing Gohan's request. From what Gohan had said, the great Sun Sword Immortal could conclude two important requests. First, Gohan had to be the chairman of the Sword Committee next year. Secondly, there was a possibility that Gohan would not hold the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee and would pass it to someone else. These two requests scared the great Sun Sword Immortal. After hesitating for a while, he said, Your Majesty, are you confident that you can ascend to the throne next year? No. Gohan shook his head decisively. It hasn't even been 4 years since I became an ancient sword wielder to a celestial sword wielder. My foundations aren't solid and I haven't even built my own army. How can I ascend to the throne in a year? I almost forgot that this guy is insane. He only used 4 years to go from ancient sword to celestial sword wielder. Hearing Gohan's words, the great Sun Sword Immortal thought back to the 20 years he had spent in the ancient sword realm. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. To be able to become an immortal sword wielder in 20 years, the great Sun Sword Immortal could be considered a genius among sword wielder. However, compared to Gohan's 4 years, he still paled in comparison. Your Majesty Gohan, you want to be the chairman of the Sword Committee as a celestial sword wielder? The great Sun Sword Immortal asked bitterly. Gohan nodded. Is there a problem? There's no precedent for this. The great Sun Sword Immortal smiled even more bitterly. For thousands of years, the chairman of the Sword Committee has always been an Emperor sword wielder. There's never been a celestial sword wielder. I'm afraid this is against the rules. Rules are made by people. This isn't a big deal. Gohan said disdainfully. Moreover, it's not like there are no examples of immortal sword wielders serving as the chairman of the Sword Committee in history. Didn't the 3rd, 4th, and 5th generation family heads of the Lunyan family become the chairman of the Sword Committee as immortal sword wielders? If they can, why can't I? Your Majesty, why are you talking about 800 years ago? How can that be compared to now? The great Sun Sword Immortal didn't know what expression to make. The truth was as Gohan had said. After Kenzu died, the 5 generations of Lunyan family's family leaders had monopolized the Sword Committee. They had been the chairman for close to 120 years as celestial sword wielder. Moreover, at that time, the chairman of the Sword Committee was not like the current chairman, who was just a vase. At that time, the chairman had real power. As long as the chairman said a word, the entire Sword Committee would not object. The entire human race had the will of a family as the core, just like a real emperor. It wasn't that there weren't any emperor sword wielders back then. On the contrary, there were 5 emperor sword wielders at the same time. However, the problem was that Kenzu and his son Lu Guangjiandi's prestige was too high. They were like royalty in this world. People were used to seeing the Lunyan family as the new world's emperor. It was only natural that their descendants would become the leaders of the human race. Most of the emperor sword wielders had received favors from the Lunyan family before they ascended to the throne. They would not object to the Lunyan family's rule. If Zhetianjiandi hadn't received any favors from the Lunyan family since he was born, and there had been a lot of dirt between them, the 6th generation of the Lunyan family had almost destroyed Zhetianjiandi's foundation. Therefore, when Zhetianjiandi dominated the world and became invincible, he slapped the Lunyan family in the face many times. The Lunyan family was very disgusted. Moreover, the Lunyan family's morals were slowly declining. The 6th generation of the family leader was a complete spoiled brat. Many experts didn't like him. In the end, the 5th generation of the family leader decided to retreat. He completely gave up the position of chairman of the Sword Committee. He also left a message for the Lunyan family to only fight for humans and not participate in human politics. One had to admit that the fifth generation of the family leader's decision was very correct. This allowed the Lun Yen family to retreat at the most critical time. Not only did they protect their beautiful reputation, but they also won the praise and sympathy of other experts and the entire society. Especially the people of Yanjing City. They felt very wronged by the Lun Yen family's retreat. They hated Zhejian Jiendi from the bottom of their hearts. This hatred also extended to Zhejian Jiendi's Yuzhang City. The 800-year-old grudge officially appeared from this moment on. Back to the main topic, the great Sun Sword Immortal was very unwilling to let Gohan be the chairman of the Sword Committee when he was still a Celestial Sword Saint. Although there were indeed examples of Celestial Sword Saints becoming the chairman of the Sword Committee in history, that was the Lun Yen family. They were the descendants of Kanzu, the supreme expert who had saved all of humanity. Who were you, Gohan? Aren't you just powerful? Is your bloodline as noble as the Lun Yen families? I've never even heard of your Gu family. That's not right. The Gu family did have such a family. It seemed to have some fame, but it was completely covered by the upper echelons of humanity. The ancestors of the Gu family were probably not good people. The great Sun Sword Immortal grumbled in his heart. If he knew that the entire Lun Yen family was a direct descendant of Gohan, the great Sun Sword Immortal would probably not care about the bloodline anymore. Great Sun Sword Immortal, think about it carefully. Actually, there is no need to be so conflicted about this. All Yanjing City needs to do is to vote for my people. As for whether I will become the chairman of the Sword and Immortal Level Sword Committee, that is not something that Yanjing City needs to worry about. Gohan said mildly. All right, the matter regarding the Fairy Sword Saint has been decided. With His Majesty Neptune's ability, even if you become the chairman of the Sword Committee, no one will be dissatisfied. After all, your ability is already comparable to an Emperor's Sword level sword wielder. But based on Your Majesty's words, Your Majesty, don't you want to be the chairman yourself? The great Sun Sword Immortal asked the question that he cared about the most. That's right. If I become the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters, I will have to stay in Yanjing City for at least 3 months a year. I can't do that, and I will bring trouble to Yanjing City. So I will arrange my apprentice Lu Shihua to be the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. Gohan said directly. This Gohan actually pushed his disciple out for the second time. This was really something. Shihua Sword Spirit? The great Sun Sword Immortal's face stiffened. Lu Shihua had already confirmed his title the day before. He would use the last 2 words of his name as his title. It sounded rather pleasant to the ear as well. A Sword Saint was the upper limit that the great Sun Sword Immortal could accept. A Sword Committee chairman of the Spirit Sword Saint was something that the great Sun Sword Immortal could not accept. Thinking of all the humans in the world worshipping a Sword Saint as their highest leader, this would probably become the biggest joke in human history. Your Majesty. Definitely not. Sword Spirit Shihua's power, even if I agree, I can't convince the other Sword Saint swordsmen to agree. I know what you're worried about. Without waiting for the great Sun Sword Immortal to finish, Gohan interrupted him. I admit that it would be inappropriate for a spiritual sword level sword wielder to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. Therefore, before the election of the Sword Committee, I will make Shihua an immortal sword wielder. If she cannot reach this standard, I will give up on this condition. I haven't mentioned it yet. This. The great Sun Sword Immortal hesitated, but finally nodded. Alright. As long as Sword Spirit Shihua can become Sword Immortal Shihua, then Yanjing City will fully support Sword Spirit Shihua to be the chairman of the Sword Committee. If it were any other Spirit Sword level sword wielder, the great Sun Sword Immortal would definitely not agree to such a condition. However, Lu Shihua was different. Lu Shihua was destined to be an Emperor's Sword level sword wielder. If they pushed Lu Shihua up when she was still at immortal sword level, and with the support of a terrifying guy like Gohan, when the time came, Yanjing City would naturally agree. It would not cause too much dissatisfaction from the other base cities. Very good. So this matter is happily decided. Gohan smiled. Our poor Lu Shihua didn't know that unknowingly, after Yuzhang City's sword court master, our Miss Lu Shihua was once again pushed to the position of chairman by Gohan. This time, Lu Shihua had no right to refuse. Since it's decided, Your Majesty, can you return our natural sword lady to me? The great sun sword immortal looked at flowing time Maple expectantly. Not now, you have to agree to one condition of mine. Gohan squinted. Your Majesty, don't go too far. We've already promised you to push Sword Immortal Shihua to the position of chairman of the Sword Committee, but you still want other conditions. The great Sun Sword Immortal stood up angrily. He didn't expect Flowing Time Maple to be so greedy. Great Sun Sword Immortal, please calm down. Gohan smiled nonchalantly and then said coldly, May I ask, Great Sun Sword Immortal, what price did you pay for the first condition? Isn't it just raising your hand? Just waving your hand. Yanjing City actually didn't pay any price, and you can get back your natural sword lady. How can there be such a good thing in the world? You. The great Sun Sword Immortal's face flushed red. This was the position of the chairman of the Sword Committee. How could it be something as simple as raising one's hand? Although in reality, Yanjing City did not pay any substantial price. Great Sun Sword Immortal, don't be angry. I, Gohan, will leave my words here. If you don't agree to my second condition, I will immediately bring my people back to Yuzhang City and enshrine the natural sword lady in Yuzhang City's sword court. In the future, your Yanjing City's sword bearers can also come to Yuzhang City's sword court to coordinate. I promise I won't stop any of them. You'll just have to work a little harder and travel a little more. Gohan smiled. The great Sun Sword Immortal finally sat down helplessly. If the people of Yanjing City had to run all the way to Yuzhang City to get what he wanted, then he, the great Sun Sword Immortal, would probably be the most embarrassing chairman of the Sword Committee in the history of Yanjing City. Chapter 1352. Speak. What other conditions do you have? The great Sun Sword Immortal said helplessly. He had no idea how to deal with Gohan. Actually, it's not something too important. Gohan looked at the 10 sword maidens floating beside him and said calmly, I want a super-dimensional wall system. Super-dimensional wall system. The great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked and looked deeply at Gohan. It wasn't that the great Sun Sword Immortal was reluctant to give up this super-dimensional wall system, because the Dimensional Wall Factory in Yanjing City already had 2 super-dimensional wall systems in storage. These 2 systems had been in storage for more than 300 years, and were just gathering dust for no reason. Even if he gave one to Fleeting Maple, he wouldn't be reluctant to give it up. At most, he could just produce another set. The great Sun Sword Immortal was truly shocked by the reason why Gohan wanted a super-dimensional wall system. Since ancient times, the super-dimensional wall system only had one purpose, and that was to be the core defense of a headquarters city. It could be said that the super-dimensional wall system was the foundation of a headquarters city's existence. As long as the super-dimensional wall system was present, the headquarters city would have the possibility of maintaining its existence for a long time. Other than the headquarters city, there were no other places that could use the super-dimensional wall system. The great Sun Sword Immortal thought about it further, and it wasn't hard for him to guess why Fleeting Maple wanted this super-dimensional wall system. Your Majesty, could it be that you want to build a 9th headquarters city? The great Sun Sword Immortal was stumped for a long time, and finally asked the question that had been on his mind. This was a question that could cause huge waves in the entire human world. Ever since the Los Angeles headquarters city was built, there hadn't been a new headquarters city in the human world for more than 400 years. The 8 human headquarters cities had been maintained for 400 years, and there hadn't been another headquarters city. It wasn't that humans didn't want to build a new headquarter city, but it was just too difficult to build one. In the early stages of a headquarter city's construction, especially during the month when the super-dimensional wall system was being built, Yuan Ko would take advantage of the time when humans didn't have the dimensional wall system to attack the city. Even the prehistoric Yuan Ko couldn't help but attack, wanting to destroy the headquarter city in its infancy. Humans might have succeeded in building 8 headquarter cities, but these 8 headquarter cities were built on dozens of other failed headquarter cities, as well as on countless human bones. Without an emperor sword wielder who was strong enough to suppress an era, it was impossible to succeed. To be able to suppress an era, an emperor sword wielder would only appear once every few hundred years. For example, Kanzu and Flowing Light Jiendi from 1,000 years ago, Zhetian Jiendi from 800 years ago, Longevity Jiendi from 600 years ago, and Without End Jiendi from 400 years ago. They were all Yuan Ko that could suppress all prehistoric Yuan Ko. They were beaten to the point that they trembled, and had no choice but to allow humans to build new headquarter cities. Apart from that, the other Jiendi that attempted to build new headquarter cities all returned in failure. Some Jiendi even died in the bases they were protecting, becoming one of the greatest tragedies of humanity. Could it be that at this moment this Gohan, who was only at the immortal sword tier, also had the idea of building a headquarter city? That's right. I have 2 dreams in this life. One is to kill all the Yuan Ko in the world, and the other is to build a headquarter city myself. Gohan put away his playful expression and looked at the great sun sword immortal seriously. But this is too dangerous, only those emperor swords that can suppress an era. I can suppress an era, no, I want to end an entire era and even surpass the emperor sword tier sword bearers. An endless aura exploded from Gohan's body in an instant. This aura actually made the great sun sword immortal breathless. He felt like he was about to suffocate. This was a feeling that the great sun sword immortal had never felt before in front of Long Shi Jiendi and Hao Tian Jiendi. Surpass, surpass. Emperor swords. The great sun sword immortal said in a daze. He had never thought that Gohan's life goal would be so great. It was close to the level of a lunatic's ravings. No, this Gohan might not be a lunatic's ravings. He might really have the ability to surpass the Emperor's sword tier sword bearers. After all, Kanzu was rumored to be on the verge of surpassing the Emperor's sword tier, and this Gohan's achievement at the spiritual sword tier is an achievement that Kanzu can only achieve at the celestial sword tier. Perhaps this Gohan can really surpass the Emperor's sword tier sword bearers and become an unprecedented super expert in human history. I might be fortunate enough to witness the birth of such a powerful sword bearer in front of me. This thought suddenly flashed through the great sun sword immortal's mind. Although the great sun sword immortal's thought was ridiculous and nonsensical, this thought took root in the great sun sword immortal's mind. However, regardless of whether this Gohan had the ability to surpass the Emperor's sword tier sword bearers, one thing was for sure. Once this Gohan became an Emperor's sword tier sword bearer, he would definitely be able to suppress an entire era. Moreover, he had the full support of his disciple Lu Shihua. The human's 9th headquarters city might be born in Gohan's hands. What right did he have to reject the human's 9th headquarters city? Thinking of this, the great sun sword immortal did not hesitate. He stood up and said, "As long as your majesty the Sea King has the heart, Yanjing City will definitely support your majesty the Sea King in building the 9th headquarters city. We will expand our territory and fight for a bigger living space for us humans." "Thank you." Seeing the great sun sword immortal's sincere face, Gohan also sincerely held the great sun sword immortal's arm and said seriously, "Great sun sword immortal, please rest assured. This 9th headquarters city will definitely be built in my hand." "Good. Our Yanjing City will definitely support your majesty the Sea King with all our strength." The great sun sword immortal also held Gohan's hand. I don't have too many requests. As long as Yanjing City can teach me a complete super-dimensional defense system, that will be enough, Guhan said quickly. No problem. Isn't it just a complete set of the super-dimensional wall protection system? We already have 2 sets in Yanjing City's warehouse. Give Your Majesty the Sea Emperor a complete set. Wait. The Great Sun Sword Immortal suddenly paused. He stared into Guhan's eyes, and hesitation flashed across his eyes. I wonder what Your Majesty the Sea Emperor means by a complete set? What else could it mean? It's a complete super-dimensional wall system that doesn't lack anything, Guhan said faintly. Then as the core of the super-dimensional defense system, the Emperor Zergs will also be included. Of course. Without the most important core, how can it be considered a complete super-dimensional defense system? I see. So this is what Your Majesty the Sea King really wants. The Great Sun Sword Immortal slowly pushed Guhan's hand away and smiled like a bitter gourd. So Your Majesty the Sea King is waiting for me here. What you want is not some super-dimensional defense system, but our Yanjing City's Emperor Zergs. In the entire human world, other than your Yanjing City, there are no Emperor Zergs that are free. If I don't ask you for it, who else should I ask? Guhan sighed. That Emperor Zerg has been in your warehouse for almost 400 years. If something is not used, no matter how precious it is, it's just a piece of stone. Why don't you let me build a base city and bring more benefits to the human race? The Great Sun Sword Immortal did not speak. He slowly stood up and said to Guhan, Your Majesty the Sea King, this is a serious matter. It is not something that I, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, can decide on my own. I have to ask Haotian Jiendi. I will only be able to agree after a meeting of the Yanjing City Sword Committee. Please forgive me for not being able to give you an answer now. I understand. Guhan nodded. The Great Sun Sword Immortal nodded as well. Then, the Great Sun Sword Immortals slightly hunched back, prepared to leave Guhan's room to look for the Sword Committee for a meeting. Wait. Guhan suddenly called out to the Great Sun Sword Immortal. The Great Sun Sword Immortal turned his head in confusion, and saw a red pouch thrown in front of him. This is... The Great Sun Sword Immortal took the red pouch, and realized that it was actually a dimensional pouch from a few hundred years ago. Moreover, it was in an ownerless state. The Great Sun Sword Immortal sent his consciousness into the dimensional brocade pouch to take a look. He was shocked to find that there were hundreds of natural sword ladies inside. Looking closely, weren't these the natural sword ladies that Yanjing City had lost? Your Majesty the Sea King, what do you mean by this? The Great Sun Sword Immortal held the dimensional pouch in his hands and looked at Guhan in confusion. I, Guhan, am not an unreasonable person. These innate sword ladies all belong to your Yanjing City. They were painstakingly saved up by your ancestors in Yanjing City. When I retrieved these natural sword ladies from the Glastonbury outpost, I never thought of keeping them to myself. I'm just returning them to their rightful owners, Guhan said calmly. The Great Sun Sword Immortal looked at the natural sword ladies that he had lost and regained. He felt as if he had been on a roller coaster today. He couldn't help but tear up. A few turbid tears flowed out from his eyes. Your Majesty the Sea King. Your Majesty. The Great Sun Sword Immortal's voice was choked up. Don't worry. Whether you agree to the Imperial Zerg's request or not, I will return these natural sword ladies to you. If you aren't willing to give them to me, then I, Guhan, can use my own abilities to find an Imperial Zerg. It's just a matter of time. Guhan waved his hand and said, Your Majesty the Sea King, don't say that. I will try my best to persuade the members of the Sword Council to. The Great Sun Sword Immortal's heart had been completely taken over by Guhan. I don't care. I'll leave it to fate. Guhan smiled. Oh yes, there's one more thing. From now on, don't call me Your Majesty the Sea King. I prefer you to call me Sword Immortal Hong Jun. Chapter 1353. On the morning of the third day, the great Sun Sword Immortal answered Gohan's conditions with a face full of fatigue and 2 dark circles under his eyes. First of all, the request to push Lu Shihua to the top position was accepted. This suggestion was passed very quickly, so quickly that it exceeded the great Sun Sword Immortal's expectations. This was because none of the Immortal Sword Tier sword bearers in Yanjing City objected. All the sword bearers agreed to Gohan's request. This was something that the great Sun Sword Immortal had not expected. Later, he found out that these immortal sword bearers all had family members trapped in the game and were saved by Gohan's help. They naturally owed Gohan a favor, so no one objected. But Gohan's second condition caused a huge debate in the Yanjing City Sword Committee. Almost 2/3 of the immortal sword bearers strongly objected to handing the Imperial Zerg to Gohan to build the 9th base city. If not for the great Sun Sword Immortal's insistence to satisfy Gohan's request, this meeting would probably have ended in failure. Yanjing City's immortal sword tier sword bearers are a little too stingy. Putting a precious Imperial Zerg in the warehouse to gather dust, aren't you willing to contribute to the future of humanity? After hearing the great Sun Sword Immortal's complaint, Gohan said unhappily, "It's not like that." The great Sun Sword Immortal shook his head. If this Imperial Zerg was really just left in the warehouse to gather dust, then there wouldn't be such a big objection. After all, the Imperial Zergs from 2 base cities were all taken from our Yanjing City warehouse. Back then, for the future of humanity, our seniors in Yanjing City handed over this precious Imperial Zerg without any hesitation, let alone us juniors. But this Imperial Zerg is of great use to us in Yanjing City. The great Sun Sword Immortal sighed and said, "The 4th loop of Yanjing City is almost full of people, and the industrial land in the 5th loop has long been occupied to the limit, to the extent that the special agricultural land in the 6th loop has begun to be occupied. The entire Yanjing City has become extremely bloated. So since 5 years ago, Yanjing City has been planning to build a new 7th ring and expand the land of Yanjing City. This way, Yanjing City can take a big breath and win more space for development in the next 100 years. I understand. Gohan smiled. Because we're expanding the 7th ring, we have to increase the coverage of the dimensional wall system. This way, we'll need a stronger core to support it, which is that Emperor Zerg, right? That's right. The great Sun Sword Immortal nodded. In order to maintain the state of 6th ring, the 2 Imperial Zergs used in the core of Yanjing City's dimensional wall system have reached the limit of expansion. If we want to expand it further, we need another Imperial Zerg. However, I only have 1 Emperor Zerg left in Beijing City's warehouse. If I give this Emperor Zerg to you, I'm afraid Beijing City will not be able to expand. The land in the 4th Ring Road will become more and more scarce, and the population will increase. The entire Beijing City will explode like a balloon that has been blown open. I understand Yanjing City's intentions. In that case, my request to borrow your Imperial Zerg has been rejected by the Sword Committee. Gohan said calmly. There was no anger on his face. Actually, the great Sun Sword Immortal should know that building a 9th base city and expanding Yanjing City were 2 completely different things. Expanding Yanjing City was just another round of fattening, but building a new 9th base city could allow humans to seize control of another area, and thus greatly reduce the territory of Yuanko in that area. The influence of a base city could allow nearly a province to be completely freed from the clutches of Yuanko, and once again become the territory of humans. As for the great Sun Sword Immortal's concern about the population explosion in Yanjing City, with the 9th base city, Gohan needed at least 30 million people to fill this base city. By then, the population problem in Yanjing City would be solved. Similarly, there would be no need to worry about the population explosion for at least 100 years. It could also greatly alleviate the conflict in Yanjing City. Therefore, the expansion of Yanjing City was no longer a necessary thing. To humans, this was undoubtedly a great thing. But as the saying goes, one's position determines one's position. Although these immortal sword wielders in Yanjing City knew in their hearts what was the most beneficial decision for humans. But as people of Yanjing City, their eyes were naturally on Yanjing City itself. If the 9th Bay City were to be built, then according to the rules of the other 7 Bay Cities, the sword pavilions in the Bay Cities would have to support a certain number of sword ladies to build the new sword pavilions. At the same time, the other Bay Cities would have to transfer some sword bearers to become residents of the new Bay Cities. Needless to say, Yanjin would have to pay the lion's share. Yanjin's power would be further weakened, which was something that the sword bearers at the Saints' Sword Pavilion would never want to see. So in the end, Yanjing City could only use the excuse that Yanjing City needed to expand to reject Gohan's request. This was also something that could be imagined. I'm sorry. I've already tried my best to persuade them, but they still. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said with a face full of shame. It's fine. I understand. I won't force this matter. Gohan smiled and patted the Great Sun Sword Immortal's shoulder. But I'll remember what happened today. To tell you the truth, I will build this 9th Bay City no matter what. Right. There is one thing that I hope Great Sun Sword Immortal can pass on to your Yanjing City Sword Committee. Gohan suddenly changed the topic. What is it? The Great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. Could it be that this Gohan saw that he had not achieved his goal, so he wanted to propose a new condition? Great Sun Sword Immortal, I would like you to pass on a message to your Yanjing City Sword Committee. Since Yanjing City is afraid that I will weaken you, then I will give you a guarantee here. In the future, when my 9th Bay City is built, I will not want a single person from Yanjing City. I will not take away a single bit of power from Yanjing City. You can just stay in your Yanjing City. From today onwards, I will not allow a single person from Yanjing to step into my Bay City. This is what I want you to pass on to the Yanjing City Sword Committee. I understand. I will definitely pass on the message. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was confused by Gohan's words. It was as if Yanjing City had made a huge mistake by rejecting Gohan. This made the Great Sun Sword Immortal feel a little amused. Yanjing City was the safest Bay City in the world. If it wasn't for the forced mobilization of the government, why would anyone be willing to migrate to a newly built Bay City? By then, what the people of Yanjing feared the most would be the government forcing them to move to a new Bay City. So even if Gohan didn't say it, no one in Yanjing City would be willing to move to your Bay City. Although the Great Sun Sword Immortal felt that it was extremely amusing, he did not dare to show it. After all, from what Gohan had said, the other party did not intend to pursue the matter any further. Then this matter could be considered to have come to a successful conclusion. What was the point of doing something superfluous and unnecessary? So in the end, the Great Sun Sword Immortal bowed deeply to Gohan and left Gohan's room, as if he was fleeing for his life. Gohan, you've really suffered a great loss this time. You've given away so many sisters, and in the end, you've only gotten a vase position. You've suffered a great loss. Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal leave, Zhu Xian jumped out of the scabbard at Gohan's waist and said mockingly, "That's right. These Yanjing people really don't know what's good for them. I've never liked these selfish Yanjing people since 800 years ago." Etian also jumped out with a wine bottle and said angrily with a face full of dissatisfaction. Qidian also came out. She was afraid that Gohan would feel sad, so she came out to comfort Gohan. "Gohan, don't be angry. There will be a time when they regret it. It's fine. All of this was within my expectations. It would be strange if the Yanjing people were willing to hand over their imperial zergs. I never had any hope for them from the start. But I've achieved my goal." Gohan walked to the window and looked at the Yanjing people on the street. He said calmly, I hate the people here. I don't like any Yanjing people appearing in my city. This is my true goal. Just an hour after the great Sun Sword Immortal left, all the television stations in Yanjing City broadcasted the signal from the Sword Committee. This was a press conference organized by the Sword Committee of Yanjing City. When the Yanjing people saw this press conference, they knew that something big had happened in Yanjing City. Because other than Hao Tian and Jiandi, almost all the immortal sword wielders in Yanjing City had appeared at this press conference. Everyone's face was brimming with smiles. And as the main speaker, the great Sun Sword Immortal was extremely happy. His face was full of smiles, and his body was full of excitement. He really announced to all the Yanjing people that the natural sword ladies that had been lost 2 years ago had all been found. Yanjing City's sword court had recovered to its most complete state. Yanjing City's honor had returned. This news made the entire Yanjing City silent for close to 10 seconds. Then, in a short moment, the entire Yanjing City exploded into thunderous cheers. Almost every corner of Yanjing City could hear the excited screams of the citizens. Some citizens even rushed to the streets and held hands and spontaneously danced. The area around the hotel that Gohan was in was naturally no exception. All the public buses stopped. Those drivers and passengers who were listening to the broadcast also jumped off the buses. They sang and danced crazily with the citizens on the streets to celebrate this wonderful news. It was so noisy that Gohan's ears hurt. Chapter 1354. After the apocalypse, the people of Yanjing had an instinctive sense of superiority. Not only did they look down on the people of Yuzhong Bay City, but they also looked down on the people of the other 6 base cities. The new Yanjing was the first base city to be rebuilt, and a savior like Kanzu had come from that city. The people of Yanjing had their noses raised to the sky. How could the other base cities compare with Yanjing? The other base cities had records of being conquered, but Yanjing had never been conquered in the past 1,000 years. That was enough for the people of Yanjing to be proud of for the rest of their lives. Yanjing was indeed powerful. Although the people of the other base cities were dissatisfied with the attitude of the people of Yanjing, they could not refute it. In the eyes of the people of the other base cities, Yanjing was indeed the most powerful base city. What they desired the most was to move to Yanjing and become a Yanjing citizen. However, in the past 2 years, the other base cities had found a reason to mock Yanjing. The Sword Tower had lost 1/10 of its natural sword ladies, and they had been betrayed by their own traitor. That was something that had never happened in the other base cities. Yanjing was the only one that had ever happened. That was the perfect reason to mock Yanjing. As a result, the people of Yanjing had been living in such mockery during the past 2 years. Countless netizens had been posting posts on various forums to mock the people of Yanjing. They would mention Yanjing intentionally or unintentionally. For example, the sword tower in our city is so beautiful. It's not like the sword tower in Yanjing. It's beautiful, but it's empty inside. For example, my neighbor was robbed. That thief was awesome. Luckily, he wasn't in Yanjing. Otherwise, he would have stolen everything from the sword tower in Yanjing. The netizens, who couldn't wait to bring up the Yanjing sword pavilion in every sentence, provoked the anger in the hearts of the Yanjing people to the extreme. But just like the people of the other base cities could not refute the arrogance of the people of Yanjing, the people of Yanjing could not refute the mockery of others either. After all, the sword ladies of the sword tower had been lost, and they had been stolen by their own people. The people of Yanjing had been suppressing such a matter for 2 years, and they had long been filled with anger. Now that they suddenly heard the great Sun Sword Immortal announce that those lost natural sword ladies had returned, the people of Yanjing felt that their 2 years of depression and anger had been instantly released. No one dared to use such a matter to mock Yanjing City anymore. The high and mighty status of the people of Yanjing had returned. Of course, the people of Yanjing would happily rush onto the streets, cheering for this wonderful thing. However, after the celebration, the people of Yanjing found that they were still being ridiculed on the internet. This was because the great Sun Sword Immortal had admitted at the press conference that these natural sword ladies had been found with the help of Yuzhong City's Hongjun Sword Immortal Guhan. All the members of the Yanjing City Sword Committee bowed to Guhan at the press conference, expressing their gratitude. Actually, a portion of the Sword Immortal level sword bearers were not willing to do this, but the Great Sun Sword Immortal had forced them to. Because the Great Sun Sword Immortal knew that Yanjing City's rejection of Guhan had made Guhan extremely unhappy. If Guhan was just a normal Sword Immortal level sword bearer, it would be fine. But Guhan could very likely become an Emperor sword bearer on par with Kanzu in the future. It was better to resolve this grudge as soon as possible. Anyway, it was just a bow. He would not lose a piece of flesh. It was no big deal. But what the Great Sun Sword Immortal did not expect was that this would become a new reason for the people of other cities to mock the people of Yanjing. These laughable people of Yanjing still have the face to dance. The sword ladies were all found by Sword Immortal Hongjun. In the end, Yanjing City still has to rely on Yuzhong City's help. This is a huge joke. It's really too funny. Among them, the people of Yuzhong City, who were the worst in Yanjing City, were the happiest to ridicule Guhan. Because Guhan was from Yuzhong City, Yanjing City owed Yuzhong City a big favor. They could finally vent their anger that had accumulated for a year. There was nothing more joyous than this. In the face of such ridicule, the Yanjing people still felt a little aggrieved, but at least they felt more comfortable than before. Forget it, the noble Yanjing people would not bother with these tasteless country bumpkins. The day after the press conference ended, the Great Sun Sword Immortal came to Guhan's hotel again. What else is there? Seeing the Great Sun Sword Immortal appear again, Guhan asked curiously. It's like this. Due to the rejection of the Imperial Zergs, the Yanjing City Sword Committee feels very bad. Therefore, we have decided to give Sword Immortal Hongjun 10th million hero coins as compensation. We hope that Sword Immortal Hongjun can understand Yanjing City's difficulties. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said sincerely. From this, it could be seen that the Yanjing City Sword Committee was very afraid of Guhan. Otherwise, they would not have taken the initiative to give 10 million hero coins to make up for Guhan's dissatisfaction. Guhan had to admit that Yanjing City's actions had indeed made up for his good impression in Guhan's heart. As the saying went, one did not hit a smiling person. Moreover, this was a smiling person who had given him 10 million hero coins. Therefore, Guhan still squeezed out a smile and accepted the hero coins without hesitation. But what Guhan did not expect was that when the hero coins were transferred through his personal terminal did not have 10 million hero coins, but 20 million hero coins. Why is there another 10 million? Guhan asked in confusion. Oh, the remaining 10 million hero coins are your reward from the Sword Committee. The Great Sun Sword Immortal explained with a smile. You fought Zhou Yu with your wits and risked your life to enter the dungeon alone to save 2 million souls. Those are all great contributions. The Sword Committee will definitely reward you. But because your contributions are too great, the Sword Committee could not come to a consensus on how to reward you. It was only yesterday that they finally came to a consensus and decided to reward you with 10 million hero coins. So in total, it will be 20 million hero coins. Thank you very much. Guhan smiled at the Great Sun Sword Immortal again. The Great Sun Sword Immortal repeatedly said, "You're welcome," and prepared to leave Guhan's residence. Wait! Guhan suddenly called out to the Great Sun Sword Immortal. The Great Sun Sword Immortal turned around in confusion and heard Guhan say calmly, "Since Yanjing City is so sincere, and Great Sun Sword Immortal has helped me so much, after my base city is built, I will give Yanjing City a quota of 1,000 immigrants, and you, Great Sun Sword Immortal, an immigration quota of 100. Thank you." The great sun sword immortal didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who would care about the immigration quota for a base city that hadn't even been established yet? And even if it was established, even if the great sun sword immortal was given 10,000 immigration quotas, he wouldn't send a single family member away from Yanjing City. This quota was a little too useless for him. Although he was complaining in his heart, the great sun sword immortal had no reason to reject it. In the end, he could only smile and accept it. I was just worrying about what to do with your sword marks. Who would have thought that these hero coins would come to me? Gohan turned around and smiled at the 4 sword ladies behind him. Excuse me, I would like to exchange for a new dimensional pocket, an elderly sword wielder said to a staff member behind the counter with a smile. 2,333 hero coins, the staff member behind the counter said with a stiff expression. Why did the price increase again? Wasn't it still 2,200 hero coins 3 months ago? The elderly sword wielder cried out when he heard the staff member's price. Now is a time when resources are tight. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? Are you going to exchange or not? If not, then hurry up and leave. Don't stand here and get in the way. The staff member said angrily when he heard the elderly sword wielder say this. He even rolled his eyes at him for free. You sigh. The elderly sword wielder was angry at first, but in the end, he retreated helplessly. He could only accept his fate and take out another 133 hero coins. This was something that could not be helped. If this staff member was a staff member from another place, the elderly sword wielder would have used his status to viciously rebuke him. But the staff members of the Merit Store were not ordinary staff members. They were staff members with extremely deep backgrounds. Although the staff members of the Merit Store were also ordinary people, what kind of place was the Merit Store? It was a unit under the direct management of the Sword Committee. Moreover, it was the unit under the Sword Committee that had the most profits. After all, the Merit Store was in charge of exchanging for rare goods that could only be exchanged with hero coins. They were precious goods that could not be bought with RMB. Working in such a place, as long as a small report of the sword mark powder was lost and the bottle of sword mark powder was sold on the black market, it could easily be exchanged for 1,000 RMB. A lost dimensional pocket could be exchanged for a super high value of 3 million RMB. As long as one did not lose anything too precious, the Sword Committee would turn a blind eye to such things. A small staff member, as long as they did their job properly and did not leave any evidence, could easily earn hundreds of thousands of RMB in a month. It was simply the best job in the world. This job was so good that one should not expect to work in the Merit Store. Almost all the staff members here were from the Emperor Sword world or the descendants of the Sword Immortal family. These descendants did not have the talent to become sword wielder. In order to make their lives richer and easier, their elders, who held real power, thought of all kinds of ways to stuff them into the Merit Store. This was extremely normal. No matter how many years had passed, as long as politics were in the hands of humans, this kind of abuse of power for personal gain was absolutely something that could not be prohibited. There was nothing strange about it. Chapter 1355. Excuse me. I also want to exchange for a dimensional pocket. After the old man left, a young man in his 20s walked up to the shop assistant and said, "Let me scan your personal terminal." The shop assistant did not even raise her head. She did not even look at the young man. Her tone was full of disdain. "No problem." The young man obediently handed the personal terminal to the shop assistant. When the shop assistant saw the first line of the scan result, she frowned. Her tone suddenly became playful. "Please pay 2,533 hero coins." The last old man had exchanged for a dimensional pocket at 2,333 hero coins, but the next one had increased to 2,533. That was an extra 200 hero coins. For an ancient sword wielder, 200 hero coins was an amount that could only be earned after a month of hard work. In the blink of an eye, the price had increased by 200. Why? Why do I have to pay 200 more? That person clearly had 2,333 hero coins. Of course, the young man did not want to give up. There was no reason for him to pay an extra 200 hero coins, so he questioned the shop assistant loudly. "What are you arguing about?" When the shop assistant heard the young man's voice, she raised her head and looked at the woman in front of her. She pointed at the birthplace column on the scan result and said coldly, "We are from Yanjing, of course, 2,333 hero coins. But you are from Yuzhong, so the price is different. You have to pay 2,533 hero coins." "Why? So what if I am from Yuzhong?" Hearing the shop assistant's words, the woman became even angrier. The Sword Committee has clearly stated that all merit shops in the world are equal. All swordsmen who enter the shop to exchange merit points have to pay the same price. What right do you have to charge 200 more hero coins to Yuzhong people? The Sword Committee has also stated that Yuan Ko should be exterminated, but why haven't Yuan Ko's all dead yet? Let me tell you, this is Yanjing City's merit exchange shop. The goods provided in this shop are also the hard-earned rewards of Yanjing City's sword bearers. It has nothing to do with you Yuzhong people. You can exchange your merit points in Yuzhong City's shop. Don't come to Yanjing City's shop. Otherwise, you'll have to pay an extra 200 hero coins. I say, are you so poor that you only have 2,333 hero coins? If you don't have money, then please step aside. Don't block the people behind you and waste everyone's time. The waiter continued to mock. All right. Since you want 2,533 hero coins, fine, I'll give you 2,533 hero coins. Hearing the woman's words, the attendant's face suddenly showed a proud expression. He thought to himself, aren't you a sword wielder? Aren't you awesome? But you still have to listen to me. I picked up another 200,000 yuan for free today. It's so cool. Since the Sword Committee headquarters had stipulated that all sword bearers would be charged the same price in the merit exchange store, Yanjing certainly could not blatantly violate this rule. In fact, if a Yuzhong person came to Yanjing's merit exchange store, he would be charged the same price of 2,333 hero coins. It was impossible for the government to collect the extra 200 hero coins. To put it bluntly, this was a tip that the staff would deduct, but this tip was not willingly given by the customer. Although the staff in the merit exchange shop had their own ulterior motives, the shop system was indeed perfect and complete. When the waiter processed the exchange through the computer, he could only deduct 2,333 hero coins. It was impossible to deduct 2,533 hero coins. However, any rules could be exploited by someone with a mind. The waiter who had the intention to embezzle 200 hero coins naturally had a corresponding method of cheating. This method of cheating was very simple. When the waiter opened the bill, she only needed to deduct 8 sword mark fragments worth 25 hero coins. The extra 8 sword mark fragments would naturally be put into the waiter's own pocket. If she sold them on the black market to those sword bearers who did not have enough hero coins but had more than enough RMB, she would easily earn 200,000 yuan. It was too fast. This kind of operation was already a piece of cake for the waiter, so she handled it very quickly. In less than a minute, she finished deducting the money. Then, she casually threw a dimensional pocket in front of the female sword bearer and said sarcastically, "Okay, you can go now." So this is the method. It's not a very clever method. The female sword bearer from Yuzhong City said disdainfully after watching the waiter's operation. There's no need for a clever method. It's fine as long as it works. The waiter continued to mock her. Logically speaking, she should be feeling guilty and afraid when her cheating method was discovered. However, there was no panic on the waiter's face. Instead, she looked fearless. Aren't you afraid that I'll report this to the Sword Committee Association and sue you for corruption? The female sword-bearer said again. Whatever. The waiter laughed even more casually. You can report it however you want, but I can remind you that the chief of the Market Supervision Section of the Sword Committee Association is my brother. Do you think he will care about a report from a Yuzhong person like you? At this point, the waiter laughed even more wildly. Some of the sword-bearers around them could not stand it anymore. They took the initiative to pull the female sword-bearer's shoulder and persuade her, "Forget it, you're a foreigner. Don't go with her. Her father is the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. I'm sure you understand now. Hurry up and leave. Otherwise, you'll suffer if you continue to pester her." What? You're the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. The female sword-bearer of Yuzhong City was shocked, and her body trembled with fear. Seeing the other party's fear, the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal's woman was naturally very proud. She could make a sword-bearer so afraid that he had been looking forward to becoming a sword-bearer since he was a child. This little girl, who could only rely on her father's authority to work as a waiter in this merit exchange store, felt a kind of perverted pleasure in her heart. So what if you're a sword-bearer? You'll still tremble in fear in front of an ordinary person like me. If you know, then get out of here. You damn Yuzhong person, you shameless Yuzhong person. I'm in a good mood now, so I don't want to bully you. Others will say that I'm bullying you. The waiter said proudly. You. The female sword-bearer stammered for a long time. Suddenly, she thought of something and was a little angry. She tried to argue. How can you insult me like this? So what if I'm from Yuzhong? Have you forgotten that it was our Yuzhong City's Sword Immortal Hong Jun who saved so many people from the game? It was our Sword Immortal Hong Jun who found your Yanjing City's natural sword lady. Our Sword Immortal Hong Jun has been so kind to your Yanjing City. He has done so many things for you and saved so many people. How can you insult our Yuzhong City? The female sword-bearer actually raised Gohan's flag. Wow, you still have the cheek to mention that B**TCH Hong Jun. Unexpectedly, once the female sword-bearer mentioned Gohan, the waiter became even angrier. She scolded loudly. Sword Immortal Hong Jun is a B**TH who kills innocent people indiscriminately. He actually dared to kill so many innocent people on the street. Also, don't think that Sword Immortal Hong Jun is indebted to the natural sword lady. It originally belongs to our Yanjing City. It's natural that Sword Immortal Hong Jun likes us. If he dares to not return it, our Yanjing City. No, my father alone can beat him until he pees his ass and kneels on the ground to beg for mercy. The waiter's scolding was extremely carefree. She vented all the anger that she had suppressed in her heart for several days. Then, she put her hands on her hips and looked at the female sword-bearer arrogantly. Get out of here. Otherwise, I have ways to make it difficult for you to move an inch in our Yanjing City. By then, even if you bring out your Sword Immortal Hong Jun, it'll be useless. Even if he's here, we'll have to be as obedient as a dog. Just like how he obediently handed over the natural sword lady of our Yanjing City. You guys don't know this, but when my dad went to ask for the innate sword ladies, that bitch, Sword Immortal Hong Jun, actually had the nerve to bargain with my dad for some benefits. In the end, my dad shook his sword chi and that weakling, Sword Immortal Hong Jun, was so scared that he knelt down and sent all the innate sword ladies back with both hands. The waiter thought that after he finished speaking, the female sword-bearer from Yuzhong City would be so scared that she would pee her ass and run away. However, to the waiter's surprise, after the female sword-bearer heard what he said, not only did she withdraw her previous panicked expression, but she even revealed a slightly playful smile. She sat in a corner of the merit exchange store and said to the man wearing a large pair of sunglasses that covered his face, "Hey, did you hear that? You were so scared by the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal that you knelt down and begged for mercy and offered those natural sword ladies with both hands. Hearing the woman in front of her, the waiter immediately revealed a puzzled expression. She didn't understand the meaning of this woman's words. She didn't understand, but that didn't mean that the surrounding onlookers didn't. Some of the astute onlookers immediately understood the meaning of this Yuzhong City woman's words. Then, they looked at the man sitting quietly in the corner with slight excitement and fear. Could it be that this man was the man who stirred up the entire Yanjing city? Sigh. Guhan, who originally wanted to complete the exchange process quietly, stood up helplessly. Since someone had insulted and arranged things to this extent, even if he didn't want to show off, he had to finish showing off. Chapter 1356. You are the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal? Why do I remember that it was not your father who came to me to discuss the Sword Lady, but the great Sun Sword Immortal? The man in sunglasses walked to the side of the shop assistant. Although he was not as tall as the shop assistant in high heels, he gave off a condescending aura, as if this man was a towering mountain. Yes, this man wearing sunglasses and sitting quietly in the corner was, of course, our Guhan, and the female swordsman in Yuzhong City was Guhan's new sword lady, the Victory Sword. At this time, Guhan's appearance had spread throughout the human world. Almost 98% of humans had carefully observed Guhan's photos, and they had to remember Guhan's appearance. As the saying goes, who in the world doesn't know the king? Guhan did not want to cause any more trouble in Yanjing City, so he deliberately disguised himself, put on a big pair of sunglasses, and came to the Merit Exchange store with the Victory Sword, asking the Victory Sword to exchange for the sword's scar mark. I don't know if the readers still remember that Guhan used Lu Shihua's authority to create a personal terminal named Gu Shirhan. This terminal could be said to be fake, because Gu Shirhan did not exist. But it could also be said that this personal terminal was real, because all the information in it was also real. It just so happened that the Victory Sword looked exactly the same as Gu Shirhan and Gu Xianyuan, so it was really a good thing to let the Victory Sword pretend to be Gu Shirhan. As for Guhan himself, he quietly sat on the side, holding the line for the Victory Sword. In case the Victory Sword was seen through, he had to come out in time to stop the situation from escalating. However, what Guhan did not expect was that the Victory Sword did not cause him any trouble. Instead, it was the shop assistant who dug her own grave, causing such a thing that Guhan had to come out to deal with. If Guhan didn't deal with this audacious woman who was full of lies, then wouldn't Guhan really have to take the blame for being scared into kneeling by the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal? You are. Who are you? At this time, the shop assistant finally understood what had happened with the Victory Sword. She realized that the man who appeared in front of her at this time was very likely to be the man she had just insulted. Suddenly, her heart almost squeezed together, and her forehead was instantly covered with sweat. Although the shop assistant's words just now were shocking and she had belittled Guhan, this shop assistant was the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. Of course, she knew the truth. She had heard the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal warning his children at home more than once about how terrifying and powerful Guhan was, and Fire Sword Immortal had warned them not to provoke him. He also took the initiative to tell them that this time, under his despotic coercion, Yanjing City had no choice but to agree to let his disciple be the next chairman of the Sword Committee. This was to let his children know the immensity of heaven and earth, and not to provoke this terrifying guy, Guhan. However, the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal did not expect that his words not only did not achieve the effect he had hoped for, but also caused his daughter to hate Guhan from the bottom of her heart. Although this shop assistant was indeed the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, the problem was that the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal had more than one daughter. The Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal was a famous stud in Yanjing City. He had married 3 wives, and also carefully selected more than 30 exclusive maids to form a huge harem. Moreover, one had to admit that the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal was really fertile. His harem of more than 30 people gave birth to a total of more than 10 sons and more than 20 daughters. Therefore, other than the children of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortals' 3 most beloved wives, the other children of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortals' personal maidservants had no status in the family and were not favored by the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. In a month, the number of words this attendant spoke to her father alone did not exceed 5. From this, it could be seen that she was not valued. Otherwise, she would not have been casually sent to this merit exchange store to work as an attendant. One had to know that the children who were truly favored by the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal had long entered the Sword Committee, and become leaders of some departments with real power. Although this merit exchange store was a department with a lot of profits, it did not have any political status. It was just a place for useless people to retire. It was precisely because of this that the waitress was so brazen in making money. She knew in her heart that sooner or later, she would have to be independent. She couldn't get too many benefits from her father. The only way to go was to save enough RMB. Thinking that a person from Yuzhong would become the chairman of the Sword Committee, and her good business of deducting foreign hero coins would be forcibly stopped, this shop assistant was furious. Recently, her expression had been particularly ugly. She hated Gohan, who had ruined her plan, to the bone. That was why she was so angry at Gohan just now. This shop assistant had thought that Gohan would never know what had happened today. She did not expect that the Hongjun Sword Immortal would actually appear in front of her. "Hello. I'm Gohan." Gohan took off his sunglasses, and then the entire merit exchange shop fell silent. The face that was firmly remembered by everyone in Yanjing City caused all the onlookers to be so scared that they didn't dare to say another word. Everyone had heard this shop assistant's insult towards Sword Immortal Hongjun just now. Presumably, this Sword Immortal Hongjun's brain was filled with rage right now. This Sword Immortal Hongjun was not a nice old man who always had a smile on his face. Instead, he was an immortal sword-level swordsman who could kill thousands of people in an instant and did not care about human lives. If they accidentally said something wrong at this time, wouldn't they be implicated? Therefore, the onlookers naturally did not dare to say another word. At the same time, they looked at the shop assistant with great sympathy, thinking that she was going to be in trouble. Even if she was the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, she would probably be beaten up. In fact, this shop assistant thought so too. The moment Gohan took off his sunglasses, she was so scared that her face turned pale. Her legs were trembling, and her high heels were like a vibrating motor that kept hitting the ground, making continuous rapid da-da-da-da sounds. "Hello, I want to exchange for the sword mark imprint," Gohan said lightly, without any angry expression on his face. At the same time, he transferred his hero coin back from Gu Shirhan's personal terminal, and at the same time, handed his personal terminal to the shop assistant. Okay. The shop assistant barely lifted her trembling hands and scanned Gohan's personal terminal. Name, Gohan identity, sword wielder grade, immortal sword level, and so on clearly appeared in front of the shop assistant. Gohan's identity had become confirmed. Her legs were completely frightened, and she collapsed on the ground, unable to stand up again. "Stand up. I want to exchange for the sword mark imprint." Seeing the shop assistant fall, Gohan said expressionlessly, "Why doesn't this sword deity Hongjun retaliate against me? He looks quite normal. Doesn't he mind what I said just now?" Seeing that there was no anger on Gohan's face, the waiter felt a little lucky and thought to himself, "That's right, he's a world-famous immortal sword wielder. He's a big shot who cares about his reputation and has to be magnanimous. Maybe he won't attack me in public. As long as I serve him well, I might be able to escape this disaster." Thinking of this, the shop assistant immediately stood up and asked Gohan with a smile, "Dear sword deity Hongjun, how many sword mark imprints do you want? I'll get it for you now." "Give me 60 sets. Gohan still said lightly. "Okay. 60 sets. Speaking of this, the shop assistant's face became stiff in an instant. After a long time, she could not help but confirm with Gohan, "Dear sword deity Hong Jun, do you want to exchange for 60 sets of sword mark imprints? From the sword mark dust to the sword mark godstone, you want 60 sets of all of them?" "That's right." Gohan nodded, then his expression changed. He asked unhappily, "Why? Don't you have 60 sets of sword mark imprints in the Yanjing City Merit Store?" Yes. The shop assistant saw Gohan's expression change, and quickly said. Then, she quickly tapped on the machine a few times and said tentatively, "Dear sword deity Hong Jun, 60 sets are worth a total of 2925936 hero coins. Do you think you can pay so many hero coins in one go? You can just pay the bill." Gohan touched his personal terminal on the cash register, and the cash register directly showed the number of hero coins left on Gohan's personal terminal. No more, no less, just over 30 million hero coins. "I'll go get it for you now." Seeing that he had enough hero coins, the shop assistant immediately ran away from the counter and entered the warehouse at the back. She used her fastest speed to get the 60 sets of sword mark imprints for Gohan. Damn! How many missions did this sword deity Hong Jun do? Why does he have so many hero coins? Even if I live 100 more lives, I won't be able to save so many hero coins. At this time, the onlookers finally could not help but start whispering. They were completely shocked by Gohan's huge amount of hero coins. Are you stupid? Sword deity Hong Jun is a swordsman who saved so many human souls. It's not too much to reward him with 30 million hero coins in one go. Another onlooker said disapprovingly. They did not know that the reward from the Sword Committee was only 10 million hero coins. The other 10 million was the reward from the Yanjing City Sword Committee. As for the remaining 10 million, it was the hero coins that Gohan had saved in the 3 years in Shanghai Pass. After all, Gohan had led the swordsmen to kill all the Wu people. It was normal for him to save so many hero coins. Sword deity Hong Jun, your things are all here. The shop assistant ran back with a dimensional box. Seeing that she had increased her speed to the maximum, her clothes were completely drenched in sweat, revealing her beautiful figure. At the same time, the shop assistant looked at Gohan expectantly and begged for mercy, hoping that Gohan would be magnanimous and let her go. However, would Gohan really let go of this waiter who was full of shit? Chapter 1357. Gohan glanced at the sword mark imprints that the attendant had given him and realized that everything was correct. All 60 sets of sword mark imprints were here. Everything is good. You're good too. Gohan nodded in satisfaction and said to the sweating attendant. No way. Sword Immortal Hong Jun praised me. The waiter was overwhelmed by the favor. She had never thought that Gohan would actually praise her. Master Sword Immortal Hong Jun, you're too kind. As long as Master Sword Immortal Hong Jun doesn't mind my unintentional mistake, I'll be grateful and dare not accept Sword Immortal Hong Jun's praise. The attendant said obediently and humbly. If she had been as humble as she was now, she would not be in such a predicament. No, I'm not praising you. You're really good. I like you. What's your name? The attendant had not expected to hear such a sentence from Gohan. She could not believe that Sword Immortal Hong Jun liked her. Could it be that her natural beauty and beautiful appearance had finally been discovered by someone, and this Sword Immortal Hong Jun had fallen in love with her? This was not her delusion. It could very well be true. Otherwise, why didn't Sword Immortal Hong Jun blame him at all when he insulted Sword Immortal Hong Jun just now? Instead, Sword Immortal Hong Jun was so calm and elegant, showing off his elegant side, just to attract his attention. Thinking of this, the waiter's entire body became excited. In her mind, she even began to imagine herself marrying Gohan. From then on, a chicken would become a phoenix. She would no longer be the concubine's daughter who was despised by her siblings at home, but a noble that even her own father had to carefully serve. Although the attendant did not know how strong Gahan was, Thunder Fire Sword Immortal had warned her children more than once that there was a 99% chance that Gahan would become an Emperor sword wielder in the future. Moreover, Gahan was still so young. He might be able to dominate humanity for more than 50 years. As long as there's a 1% chance, I must find a way to become Sword Immortal Hong Jun's woman and win his love. In the blink of an eye, the waiter's thoughts had turned into a ridiculous one. My name is Lei Wanru. After Lei Wanru finished speaking, she gave Gahan a shy smile. So it's Miss Lei Wanru. Gahan smiled and nodded, then said, Miss Lei Wanru, I have high hopes for you. I wonder if you would be willing to join my family and come to my home? It's coming. Sword Immortal Hong Jun really likes me. I'm about to suffocate. He actually really likes me and wants me to become his woman and join his family. Oh my god, how could Sword Immortal Hong Jun be so direct? I wasn't mentally prepared at all. I'm about to suffocate. Hearing Gahan's words, Lei Wanru's little heart was about to explode. She was so excited that she felt a little dizzy. She only felt that her blood was gushing out through her skin. Miss Lei Wanru, please give me a reply. Are you willing to join my family? After waiting for a minute or two, Gahan asked impatiently again. How should I answer? Should I be a little more reserved? A girl shouldn't take the initiative to agree to such a thing, even though he is Sword Immortal Hong Jun. Lei Wanru thought to herself. She opened her mouth with difficulty and said, That's not good. It's a little too fast. I'm not mentally prepared at all. Oh. Gahan nodded, then shook his head regretfully. It turns out that Miss Lei Wanru isn't willing to join my family. It seems that I was rash. In that case, just pretend that I didn't make such a request. Goodbye. After saying this, Gahan was ready to leave the merit exchange store. Seeing Gahan turn around, Lei Wanru's heart was about to break down. Was what she said so easily misunderstood? Even a fool would be able to tell that she was trying to reject him. Why did he leave so easily? At that moment, Lei Wanru's remaining intelligence was not enough for her to figure out the meaning behind Gahan's series of actions. No matter what, she could not miss this opportunity to become a phoenix. Therefore, at that moment, Lei Wanru threw away her last bit of reservation and shouted at Gahan's back, Don't go! I'm willing! Gahan turned around suavely and faced Lei Wanru again. He smiled and confirmed, Miss Lei Wanru, are you really willing to join my family? I'm willing. This time, Lei Wanru quickly nodded and admitted. It was such a good opportunity. Once she missed it, there would definitely not be a next time. Damn. Isn't this change a little too fast? Looking at the plot that was like a third-rate Mary Sue romantic comedy, the onlookers felt that their brains were not enough to process it. Why was this girl scolding Gahan just a second ago, and then willing to become Sword Immortal Hong Jun's woman the next second? Moreover, Sword Immortal Hong Jun did not use his identity to force anything from the beginning to the end. Wasn't this Lei Wanru a little too cheap? And what was going on with that Gahan? The dignified Sword Immortal Hong Jun did not have any reaction when he heard someone scolding him like that. Instead, he fell in love with this woman. Wasn't this a melodramatic plot that only appeared in third-rate Mary Sue romantic comedies? How could such a plot actually happen in reality? If such a plot was really possible, then she would specially block the door of those sword-bearers and scold them. Then, she would see if she could also become a phoenix. The onlookers were shocked by the astonishing change in Lei Wanru's attitude in less than 10 minutes. They could not understand why a woman who was scolding the other party a second ago would want to stick to the other party in the next second. This was because the onlookers' common sense was not enough. Although Lei Wanru was scolding Gahan just now, she was just like those ordinary people who scolded corrupt officials. Once this ordinary person became an official one day, he was afraid that he would be even more corrupt than the previous corrupt officials. In fact, the harsher the ordinary people scolded the corrupt officials, the more corrupt they would be when they became officials. This was because they had a lot of desires in their hearts, and when these desires could not be satisfied, they could only curse those people and positions that they dreamed of. Miss Wanru, let me confirm with you one last time. Are you really willing to let go of everything that you have now, give up your position in Yanjing City's Merit Exchange Store, join my family, and become a member of my family? Guhan confirmed with Lei Wanru for the third time. I am willing. Lei Wanru's answer was even more determined. Very good. Guhan smiled and nodded, then took out his personal terminal, dialed a number, and asked in front of Lei Wanru, "Hello, is this Yanjing City's exclusive maid training academy?" What? His communication is to the exclusive maid training academy? Why would he call that kind of despicable place? Guhan's words made Lei Wanru stunned. Her brain had not figured out why Guhan wanted to call the exclusive maid training academy, but she instinctively had an ominous premonition. It's like this. I have a young girl who is willing to be my exclusive maid here. I hope that I can entrust your Yanjing City's exclusive maid training academy to carry out 3 years of maid training. Is that okay? What do you mean by a professional maid? What professional exclusive maid do you have? Service Department and Home Economics Department. No, I don't need a maid in the Service Department. My family only lacks an exclusive maid to clean, wash, and cook. Then I'll take an exclusive maid in the Home Economics Department. Register my identity? My name is Guhan, and my sword wielder is at the Immortal Sword tier. And I'm Sword Immortal Hong Jun. What? You're sending someone to accept this exclusive maid into school now? Isn't that too inconvenient? Alright, I'm at the Merit Exchange Store in the core area now. You can just send someone over directly. And don't worry, I've personally confirmed with this lady 3 times. She's agreed. Everyone around can testify for me. I didn't do anything to force her. She's completely willing. Alright, it's settled then. I'll wait for you at the Merit Exchange Store. Alright. Guhan hung up the communication. All the smiles disappeared, and he regained his cold expression. He said to Lei Wanru, "Alright, Miss Lei Wanru, welcome to my family. From today onwards, you're my exclusive maid." Exclusive maid. Lei Wanru took a few steps back weakly and fell on her butt. Her hair was scattered in an instant, and she looked like a female ghost. No matter how confused she was, she had heard Guhan's conversation clearly. This was what Guhan meant when he asked her to join his family. He actually wanted her to be his exclusive maid, such a lowly position. Moreover, to be the exclusive maid of the Home Economics Department, which was even more lowly and despairing. Was her future going to be wasted in those endless pots and pans? You're taking revenge on me. You're taking revenge on me. At this moment, Lei Wanru understood one step further. This Guhan had not forgiven her at all. He had only lured her into a trap. He wanted to use a lowly maid to deeply humiliate her character. He was a demon, and she had actually foolishly thought that he had slept with her. No, she could not accept such an ending. No. I won't do it. I don't want to be some F***king exclusive maid. Lei Wanru stood up from the ground and ran toward the backstage of the Merit Exchange Store. She wanted to escape from this sinister, vicious, and cunning Sword Immortal Hong Jun. I'm sorry, Miss Lei Wanru. You can't leave. Suddenly, 2 women dressed like waitresses stood in front of Lei Wanru. They looked at the disheveled girl in front of them playfully and said, "Miss Lei Wanru, all of us heard that you're willing to join Master Hong Jun's family and resign from your position in our Merit Exchange Store. You're no longer an employee of our Merit Exchange Store. You have no right to leave our staff area. Please leave our Merit Exchange Store through the main door." Chapter 1358. In the Merit Exchange Store, Lei Wanru's family background was not the most powerful, but her temper was definitely the worst. Her conduct was also the worst, especially when it came to embezzlement. She was even more brazen and did not know how to avoid doing things. With such a personality, Lei Wanru naturally would not have any good relations in the merit exchange store. There were even many people who wanted to embarrass Lei Wanru behind her back, or give her a pair of shoes to wear. However, because of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, no one had done so yet. After all, it would not be good if such a thing were to blow up. If it were to blow up, the merit exchange store's dirty tricks would be widely known. At the beginning, when Lei Wanru courted death by insulting Sword Immortal Hong Jun, and when Gohan took the initiative to offer himself, these waiters wisely chose to watch from the sidelines. They quietly shrank to the side and pretended as if they did not exist. They wanted to watch Lei Wanru make a fool of herself. However, what these waiters did not expect was that not only did Sword Immortal Hong Jun not blame Lei Wanru, but he seemed to have taken a liking to her and wanted to take her into his room. This made these waiters who were watching from the sidelines very unhappy. At the same time, they muttered softly. If they had scolded Sword Immortal Hong Jun just now, would they also be able to become a phoenix? Just as these waiters were feeling vexed and envious of Lei Wanru, the situation ushered in the most perfect reversal. This Sword Immortal Hong Jun actually planned to use such a vicious move as an exclusive maid to deeply humiliate Lei Wanru. This instantly made the other waiters feel extremely satisfied. Therefore, the moment Lei Wanru was about to escape through the staff's passageway, two waiters with the most powerful backgrounds, who were not inferior to the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, jumped out and blocked Lei Wanru's way. They used the most dignified reason to prevent Lei Wanru from leaving through the staff's passageway. At the same time, they forced Lei Wanru to face Gohan directly. To Lei Wanru, this was undoubtedly more terrifying than killing her. On the other hand, Gohan did not take the initiative to force Lei Wanru. He did not even make a move or say a word. He just stood quietly in front of the counter and watched Lei Wanru, who was sitting on the ground, blocked by her colleagues and could only be trapped in the small space behind the counter. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate. After more than 10 minutes, a few rapid footsteps pushed through the growing crowd of onlookers into the merit exchange store. Everyone took a closer look and found that these people who came at this time were all women, and they were wearing uniform-made uniforms with the words, Yanjing City Exclusive Maid Training Academy, hanging on their chests. Obviously, the people from the Maid Training Academy who had just spoken to Gohan on the phone had arrived. However, they were different from the soft and charming exclusive maids in their impression. At this time, these exclusive maids all looked strong and strong. They were all healthy women in their 30s or 40s. Such women wearing maid uniforms that made people's imagination run wild always gave people a very contradictory sense of déjà vu. However, it could be seen that the exclusive Maid Training Academy was experienced. They knew that not all the acceptance processes were smooth, and they needed these big and strong women to do it. Hello, Sword Immortal Hong Jun. Here is the application form, please fill it out. These maids respectfully transferred a spreadsheet to Gohan's personal terminal. Gohan nodded and quickly filled it out, completing the entire entrusted training process. In fact, the process of this entrusted training was relatively complicated. At least 2 or 3 hours were needed for the sword holder to complete all the procedures. However, who was Sword Immortal Hong Jun? How could his precious time be wasted in such a place? Therefore, the exclusive Maid Training Academy took the initiative to simplify all the procedures to the extent that only a form was needed. Take her away. After the leading maid confirmed that the form was completed, she waved to her companions behind her. Under the service of the other attendants who opened the door, they quickly entered the counter. One by one, they grabbed Lei Wanru's arm as if they were grabbing a chick and forcefully pulled her out. Let me go. I was forced. I was deceived. I don't want to be an exclusive maid. Let me go, let me go. Lei Wanru struggled and screamed desperately. This. The leading exclusive maid couldn't help but hesitate. It would be fine if they were in a secluded place, but there were so many onlookers here. If Lei Wanru was really forced, then even with Sword Immortal Hong Jun's background, it would be difficult for them to deal with this matter. Lei Wanru, stop screaming. Both of us heard it just now. You have already agreed to Sword Immortal Hong Jun's request and agreed to join his family. Why are you still quibbling? Don't you recognize what you said? The two attendants at the side immediately screamed. You two bastards! Both of you are in cahoots with Sword Immortal Hong Jun. You colluded to harm me. Lei Wanru scolded. Both of us are liars? The two attendants snorted coldly and immediately said to the surrounding onlookers, everyone be the judge. Everyone saw and heard what happened just now. Did this Lei Wanru agree to Master Hong Jun's request 3 times in a row and become his exclusive maid? That's right. We heard it. I can testify. Yes, I can also testify. We all heard it. This Miss Lei Wanru really said so. The surrounding onlookers immediately became noisy. Many of these onlookers were sword-bearers who had been harassed or ridiculed by Lei Wanru. In their hearts, they only had a deep hatred for Lei Wanru and did not have a good impression of her. Now that there was such an opportunity in front of them, they certainly wouldn't miss it. What's more, there was no need to lie against their conscience. Lei Wanru had indeed agreed to Gohan's request again and again. They were just telling the truth. Seeing that the surrounding onlookers had said so, the few people from the Maid Academy were instantly relieved. They no longer cared about Lei Wanru's excuses and forcefully dragged her back to the academy to receive 3 years of training. Let me go. My father is the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. My father won't let you off for treating me like this. Lei Wanru saw that her previous words were useless and could only use her father as a shield. Sure enough, when the people from the Maid Academy heard that Lei Wanru's father was the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, they became hesitant again. The Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal and Hong Jun Sword Immortal were on the same level, and the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal was a local immortal sword bearer in Yanjing City. Gohan was only an immortal sword bearer in Yuzhong City and couldn't stay in Yanjing City for long. Once the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal exerted pressure on the academy and Gohan wasn't around, the academy really didn't know how to deal with it. Sigh. Gohan sighed. He knew that it was time for him to step in and deal with it. However, just as he took out his personal terminal rang. Looking at the name of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal displayed on his personal terminal, Gohan revealed a surprised smile. Speak of the devil and he will appear. Hello, Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal, long time no see. Gohan said in front of everyone. Lei Wanru's heart was instantly filled with joy. Her father must have found out about her and called to save her. So you already know about this. However, I really like your daughter, Miss Lei Wanru, and hope that she can become my exclusive maid. What do you think, Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal? Alright. I understand. Thank you. I will definitely pay you a visit another day. After all, your daughter is also one of my people. Our families can be considered in-laws. Of course, I should pay you a visit personally. Gohan chatted cheerfully with Sword Immortal Thunder and Fire, who was on the other end of the call. Lei Wanru's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. She had a very bad premonition about what was about to happen. Alright. Please explain it to me. After a short conversation, Gohan took the initiative to turn on the external speaker function of his personal terminal. The Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal's voice was immediately transmitted to everyone's ears. I am Lei Wanru's father, the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. I agree to let my daughter become Sword Immortal Hong Jun's exclusive maid. Please follow the Academy's rules and educate my immature daughter so that she can fully satisfy all of Sword Immortal Hong Jun's needs. She will become an exclusive maid who is useful to society and able to contribute to society. That's all I have to say. You can take her away now." After saying this, the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal immediately hung up. "Dad, you can't do this to me. I am your biological daughter." Lei Wanru screamed shrilly when she heard the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal's words. However, it was useless to say anything else now. After the people from the exclusive Maid Academy heard the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal's declaration, they no longer had any scruples. They forcefully pulled Lei Wanru onto their school bus, and quickly disappeared on the other side of the road. "Let's go too," Gohan said to the Victory Sword calmly, and left the Merit Exchange store. When the onlookers saw that the matter was over, they dispersed one after another. However, the complete video of the incident was leaked to the internet. Soon, many netizens learned of this interesting story. At the same time, they also felt a deep fear towards Sword Immortal Hong Jun. This Sword Immortal Hong Jun was actually able to make the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal give up his pride and take the initiative to give his daughter to him as his exclusive maid. How powerful was this Sword Immortal Hong Jun? "Master, this Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal was too cowardly. He gave up his daughter just like that." On the way back to the hotel, the Victory Sword said to Gohan in confusion, "He has more than 20 daughters. One less is not a big deal to him. Moreover, I can become a family with him. What's the point of losing face? Today, he gave me face. In the future, I will return the favor. My face is much more valuable than his." Gohan said calmly. "Then what about Lei Wanru? Boss, you can't really want to take her as your exclusive maid, right? I'm disgusted by this woman," Victory Sword said in a slightly displeased tone. "Originally, I didn't really want her to be my exclusive maid. I only wanted her to stay in the exclusive Maid Academy for 3 years and teach her a lesson. It could be considered as helping her in her future life. However, I didn't expect her to reveal her father's identity. I really didn't expect the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal to give his daughter to me as his exclusive maid. In this way, I have no choice but to take her as my exclusive maid after 3 years," Gohan said with slight helplessness. "So, she asked for it and gave up her life." The Victory Sword was stunned for a moment and then said with infinite emotion, "That's right." Gohan shrugged. The truth was so ridiculous. Chapter 1359. Chairman, I just received news that Sword Immortal Hong Jun and his disciple have already left Yanjing City. We don't know where they went. On the 3rd day of the press conference, the Great Sun Sword Immortal, who was dealing with various matters, suddenly received news that Gohan had already left Yanjing City. This made the Great Sun Sword Immortal heave a long sigh of relief. This meant that Gohan would no longer pursue the matter of the Natural Sword Lady. This matter was over. "I got it. If there's nothing else, you can continue with your work," the Great Sun Sword Immortal said to his secretary. There's one more thing. The Merit Store's purchasing department has reported to the Sword Committee that their sword mark imprints are almost depleted. Especially the first-class sword mark divine stones, they've all been exchanged. They hope that the Sword Committee can replenish it immediately. Otherwise, the Merit Store will not be able to carry out daily exchanges, the secretary said. "What? How did it deplete so quickly?" Hearing the secretary's words, the Great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. He immediately asked, "How did this happen? Didn't the Sword Committee replenish the stock of the Merit Store a month ago? And those sword mark divine stones, I remember that the Merit Store had 60 of them. How did they all disappear? There are only 200 of them left in the storage of the Sword Committee. How could they have all been exchanged in a month?" "It's Sword Immortal Hong Jun," the secretary said with a sad face. "Sword Immortal Hong Jun went to the Merit Store yesterday and used 30 million merit points to exchange for 60 sets of imprints. That's why the entire Merit store no longer has any sword mark imprints. Hearing the secretary's words, the great sun sword immortal revealed a pained expression. He could only console himself. Forget it, just give it to them. Compared to the imperial seeds and the natural sword lady, these things are not worth mentioning. So be it. As long as this ancestor can put down his prejudice against Yanjing City, it would be worth it to give him 100 sets. Other than the sword mark imprints, did Sword Immortal Hong Jun exchange for anything else? The Great Sun Sword Immortal asked curiously. This Sword Immortal Hong Jun only exchanged for 60 sets of sword mark imprint. He did not exchange for anything else, but... The secretary looked like he wanted to say something. But what? Don't say half of what you're saying, the Great Sun Sword Immortal said with a pained expression. However, Sword Immortal Hong Jun also took in an exclusive maid from the Merit Exchange store. Wei Pei went to our Yanjing City exclusive maid training academy to train for 3 years, the secretary said weakly. There's such a thing. The Great Sun Sword Immortal was shocked. This Guhan didn't look like a lecherous person. Why would he do such a thing? Could it be that there was a peerless beauty in the Merit Exchange store? That's not right. The girls in the Merit Exchange store are all young girls, and they are the relatives of my friends. I've seen most of them before, and there really aren't any beauties that could move my heart. I think that personal maid is the daughter of the Thunder and Fire Sword Immortal. However, the process is a little... Forget it, Chairman, you should take a look for yourself. I can't explain it clearly. The secretary immediately pulled up the entire video taken by the onlookers. After the Great Sun Sword Immortal watched it, his mouth gaped wide open. After a long while, he closed it again. With a slightly helpless and bitter smile, he said, "This Sword Immortal Hong Jun, he also has such an interesting side? Master, are we going back to Yuzhang City?" Lu Shihua asked softly as he massaged his sore and swollen thigh while holding his brother's hand. "Yes. We'll send your brother back to Yuzhang City first." Guhan nodded. "Then why aren't we driving the hovercraft?" Lu Shihua asked with a pained expression. "This should be nothing to you in the past. How long has it been since you last walked?" Guhan asked with a frown as he watched Lu Shihua continuously massaging his thigh. Although Lu Shihua didn't want to admit it, he still nodded honestly. "Ever since I became the Sword Pavilion Master, Shi Jueyuan has given me a lot of tedious work. I spend most of my time in the Sword Pavilion's office, and I completely rely on the Pavilion Master's car to go out. That's why I haven't walked in a long time." "Excuses," Guhan said coldly. "Not only have you not walked in the past 3 years, I'm afraid that you haven't practiced the swordsmanship that Master taught you. If you had followed Master's teachings and practiced the swordsmanship for 8 hours every day, even if you didn't walk, it wouldn't have been a problem for you. Master, please forgive me. I have slacked off." Lu Shihua's footsteps suddenly stopped, and he rushed to kneel down in front of Guhan. Right on this wet muddy ground, he kowtowed to Guhan 3 times, and said with incomparable shame, "Sword Immortal Hong Jun, it's not like that. Sister has to work until late at night every day. She really doesn't have time to practice. Sister didn't slack off on purpose." Seeing his sister kneeling on the ground and apologizing to Guhan, Lu Yin hurriedly explained for his sister. "I'm not going to hold you accountable. If I wanted to, I would have done so back in London. I know that you have suffered a lot in the past 3 years. Master has let you down. I won't hold you accountable for this." Guhan shook his head, helped Lu Shihua up from the ground, and patted the mud off her body. "Master." Lu Shihua's nose was filled with bitterness. She was so touched that tears flowed out uncontrollably. At the same time, with this sudden touch, Lu Shihua burst out with great courage. She threw herself into Guhan's arms and repeatedly called him master in a slightly spoiled tone. "Hey! Silly disciple! Gohan smiled bitterly as he patted Lu Shihua's head. Lu Yin looked at Gohan with jealousy. He had never seen his sister show such a weak expression. His sister would only show such an expression in front of Gohan. This made Lu Yin very jealous. Master, you can let bygones be bygones. Since you have already come out of Shanghai Pass and become a celestial sword wielder, you will become an emperor sword wielder sooner or later. As my only disciple, you must not embarrass me. If you don't have more than half of my abilities, I will be too embarrassed to admit that you are my disciple. Moreover, I only have you as my only disciple. With my abilities, my 9 swords of mysterious heaven and chaos sword technique, I must rely on you to pass it on. If you can't accept my inheritance, I will have to find another disciple. Gohan said calmly. No. Master, don't look for another disciple. Shihua doesn't want juniors. No. It's just that it's hard enough for you to teach one disciple. I can't bear to see you teach more disciples. Disciple promises Master that disciple will definitely be able to learn all of Master's abilities and spread the legacy of my Hongjun lineage. Lu Shihua immediately jumped out of Gohan's embrace and said with an anxious expression. It seemed that Lu Shihua really did not want to see another junior brother or sister. That's good. Since you have this awareness, I am very happy. Gohan nodded in satisfaction. Actually, I have a maglev flying car in my dimensional pocket. It will take us 3 days at most to return to Yuzhong City. But I don't want that. I want you to use your feet to walk the mountains and rivers from Yanjing City to Yuzhong City as your cultivation. From now on, I will teach you swordsmanship at night. During the day, you will take the initiative to find all the Yuan Ko nearby and use these Yuan Ko as your whetstone. This way you can grow quickly. Do you understand my painstaking efforts? Gohan asked Lu Shihua as he looked into his eyes. Yes, Master, I understand. Lu Shihua nodded vigorously. Very good. Gohan patted Lu Shihua's head again and said, I have already felt that a group of Yuan Ko has discovered us. They are recklessly attacking us. I will leave these Yuan Ko to you. Also, you are not allowed to release your sword lady. You must fight with your own strength. Is there a problem? No problem. Lu Shihua replied loudly as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Master, what kind of Yuan Ko is this? It looks so cute. When dozens of yellow-skinned Yuan Ko with lightning-like tails and bodies like big mice appeared in front of Lu Shihua could not help but ask Gohan. Let me check. Gohan scanned them with the illustrated handbook and immediately said to Lu Shihua, these Yuan Ko are called Pikachu. They are soul-grade Yuan Ko and can release 100,000 volts of electric current. Yes, Master, I understand. Lu Shihua looked at the Pikachu in front of him and immediately said with some embarrassment, although you are very cute, so cute that I can't help but lay my hands on you, I will not be tempted by you. But I won't be tempted by you. I promised Master that I would definitely destroy you. Small soul-grade Yuan Ko, watch as I, the Shihua sword spirit, destroy you. After Lu Shihua finished saying these meaningless and somewhat funny lines, he waved the 8-winged seraphim sword in his hand and charged towards these Pikachu. Pikachu. When the dozens of Pikachu saw Lu Shihua rushing towards them, their mung bean-like eyes looked at each other and their bodies simultaneously emitted yellow electric light. These yellow electric lights converged in the air and directly struck Lu Shihua's body. Chapter 1360. Master, your disciple is useless. After a thrilling battle, Lu Shihua, who was lying on the ground, had tears streaming down his face as he spoke to Gohan. It was obvious that Lu Shihua had lost the battle, and it was a very miserable defeat. The opponent was clearly just a few dozen soul-level Yuan Ko, who was equivalent to a treasure sword-level sword wielder. Facing a spirit sword-level sword wielder like Lu Shihua, even 100 of them shouldn't be his opponent. At the start of the battle, Lu Shihua relied on the fact that he had a thick and sturdy personal shield. He simply didn't care about Pikachu's electric shock. He wanted to directly rely on his personal shield to forcefully withstand the attack and get close to these cute big mice. However, what Lu Shihua did not know was that these Pikachu had a special characteristic, and that was, although their electric shock damage could be blocked by the close-fitting shield, they were still able to withstand it. However, the paralysis effect of the electric shock was something that could not be blocked by a close-fitting shield. Especially when dozens of Pikachu's electric shocks combined, Lu Shihua was directly electrocuted to the ground by this powerful paralysis, unable to move. In this way, Lu Shihua became a living target for the Pikachu. The continuous electric shocks were acting on Lu Shihua's body. Even if Lu Shihua's personal shield was thick, there were still times when it couldn't hold on. Therefore, after Lu Shihua's personal shield shattered, Lu Shihua could only use this body to withstand Pikachu's electric shock. When Lu Shihua was electrocuted until his entire body was charred black and on the verge of death, Gohan dispersed the Pikachu. He then squatted beside Lu Shihua, who had turned into a charred corpse, and calmly looked at his pitiful disciple. Thinking of the heroic words he had spoken before the battle, as well as his current miserable appearance, Lu Shihua not only felt that his body was in excruciating pain, even his heart was in excruciating pain. When tears flowed down the corners of his bloody eyes, the excruciating pain became even more intense. Lu Yin, get your sister into the med bay. Otherwise, she won't live for more than 5 minutes, Gohan said as he tossed his med bay to Lu Yin. Oh! Lu Yin, who had been scared out of his wits, finally reacted. He hurriedly rushed forward to pick up his sister, but when his hands touched Lu Shihua's charred skin, Lu Shihua instantly let out a loud howl like a pig being slaughtered. Ah! Lu Yin, be gentler. Are you trying to kill your sister? This mournful howl startled the entire forest. Countless birds flew up from afar. It was a picturesque scene. Don't call me that. How dare you scold your brother when you don't have the ability? If it hurts, then endure it. If you can't even deal with a few dozen Pikachu, what right do you have to complain about pain? Before Lu Yin could say anything, Gohan coldly berated him. Lu Shihua immediately shut his mouth. Lu Shihua didn't dare to cry out in pain even though the pain was constantly assaulting his body. Sister, you are much lighter than before. It feels like a feather. Seeing his sister's pained expression, Lu Yin couldn't help but comfort her. He knew that his sister cared about her weight the most. However, this was the truth. When a person was burned, the muscles all over their body would be destroyed. They would also lose a lot of body fluids, so their body would become much lighter. Is that so? Sure enough, after hearing his brother's words, Lu Shihua, who was originally in pain, actually showed a hint of happiness. It seemed that weight was something that women pursued since ancient times. The burn looked quite serious, but it was an injury that could be easily treated by the medical pod. So, in just 2 hours, Lu Shihua jumped out of the medical pod energetically and returned to her original beautiful appearance. Master! After coming out of the medical pod, Lu Shihua lowered his head and stood beside Gohan with a face full of shame. Gohan didn't say anything. He looked at the time on his personal terminal and said to Lu Shihua, "Follow me." Lu Shihua followed Gohan in an unknown direction for a while. Then, he saw Gohan's sword lady, Heavenly Sword, sitting on a rock and waiting for him with a smile. "Gohan, I've done what you wanted me to do. Where's my reward?" Heavenly Sword asked as he stretched his hand out to Gohan. "Here you go." Gohan placed a bottle of red star erguotu in Heavenly Sword's hand. Ever since he had drunk it, Heavenly Sword had fallen in love with the taste. That was why Gohan had been able to loot a lot of old red star erguotu from the warehouse in Beijing. However, he had hidden all of them in another dimensional pocket and used them as tools to bribe Heavenly Sword. Gohan and Lu Shihua lay on the big rock and looked over it. They saw a big pit that looked like it had been smashed by a meteorite. There were more than 300 Pikachu together in the big pit. It was obvious that they were a large Pikachu group. Very good. Seeing so many Pikachu, Gohan nodded in satisfaction. When he saw Gohan nod, a creepy feeling welled up in Lu Shihua's heart. This Gohan, don't tell me he wants to. In the next second, Lu Shihua's bad premonition was confirmed. He heard Gohan say to Lu Shihua, "Shihua, let's stay here for the time being. We'll leave when you can kill all these Pikachu." Hearing this, Lu Shihua's entire body instantly became like a rock. "What are you still standing there for? Etion, go lure a few dozen Pikachu out for Shihua to practice with. Remember, you're not allowed to hurt a single Pikachu, do you hear me?" Gohan stuffed another bottle of red star ergotu into Etion's arms. "No problem. I promise I'll complete the mission," Etion said with great satisfaction as he carried the 2 bottles of 100-year-old wine. This also meant that Lu Shihua's suffering had begun. When dusk approached, Lu Yin once again carried the charred Lu Shihua back to the medical cabin. As the heavenly sword had not controlled the aggro well, it had accidentally lured nearly 40 Pikachu over. As a result, Lu Shihua's injuries were even worse than the last time. Lu Yin's body trembled. When the physically and mentally exhausted Lu Shihua crawled out of the medical pod with great difficulty, her suffering did not end. She was once again pulled by Gohan to a flat ground to teach her swordsmanship. She was personally trained by Gohan. Originally, Gohan planned to teach Lu Shihua the mysterious Lady of the 9 Heavens sword technique. However, Gohan did not have the time to go to the peak of Kunlun, so naturally, he had no way of obtaining the mysterious Lady of the 9 Heavens sword technique. However, considering that his strongest technique, the Chaos Sword technique, had its foundation evolved from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Therefore, after careful consideration, Gohan still decided to teach Lu Shihua the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. This way, it would be more convenient for him to teach Lu Shihua the Chaos Sword technique in the future. However, Lu Shihua was not the only one who was being trained. Many sword ladies also received Gohan's teachings along with Lu Shihua. Among them, Chidian, Doyu, Juzi, and even Etion took the initiative to jump out and ask Gohan to teach them. They also deeply felt that they were lacking in swordsmanship and hoped that Gohan would help them improve as well. As for the poor little Chinpin, he was forced to be a strong man by Gohan. This little guy, who was extremely tired when practicing swordsmanship, actually did not have any intention of taking the initiative at all. This was ridiculous. He needed to be properly trained. Other than that, the other sword ladies did not seem to have any interest in training. Shi Shui was still the same, living alone in the scabbard. If there was nothing particularly important, she would definitely not come out. The 3 sisters of the immortal execution sword could be said to be the ancestors of the sword ladies in the world. Although Gohan had never seen the 3 sisters' swordsmanship with his own eyes, he saw that they did not care about the 9 swords of mysterious heaven that Gohan taught them. It seemed that their swordsmanship was already very powerful, so they had no interest in participating in this kind of training. However, what Gohan did not understand was that the victory sword actually looked at Gohan's 9 swords of mysterious heaven with disdain. The victory sword could be considered as a sword lady who had synchronized with many sword bearers before. Her strength was also recorded in a more comprehensive manner. According to the senior immortal sword wielders who had coordinated the victory sword was a rather useless immortal sword tier sword mistress. In terms of skills, they were very simple. They were all direct attack skills without any special skill effect. In terms of swordsmanship, although the victory sword's swordsmanship itself could not be said to be very weak, it was very bad compared to the other sword ladies. It could not beat any sword lady of the immortal execution sword and was the last in the immortal sword record. According to Gohan's original estimation, the Victory Sword's swordsmanship was probably only better than the past Water Sword, Chinpin Sword, and Duyu Sword among all his sword ladies. In terms of swordsmanship alone, the Victory Sword could not beat any of the other sword ladies. But now, in the midst of victory, she was actually looking down on the other sword maidens who were in the midst of training. This made Gohan feel slightly surprised. Victory! Why don't you participate in my swordsmanship training? Gohan grabbed an opportunity to walk to the Victory Sword's side and ask curiously. There's no need. The Victory Sword laughed and shrugged her shoulders. I know everything that you know. I don't need you to teach me. Gohan fell silent. He looked at the Victory Sword deeply, then pulled out passing water from its scabbard. He pointed the tip of the sword at the Victory Sword that looked exactly like Gu Xianyuan and asked, Victory, are you willing to spar with me? Of course. If you need it, Master. The Victory Sword nodded, and the spar between the sword bearers and sword ladies suddenly began. Chapter 1361. So that's how it is. After sparring with his sword lady, Gohan had not regained his senses. He was still immersed in the battle. It was not that Gohan had lost the sparring. Gohan was still the winner. However, Gohan's victory had not been easy. Without using sword element, he had fought with the Victory Sword for more than 1,000 moves. He had only defeated the Victory Sword by relying on some sword techniques that he had learned in the Instance Dungeon. This was the first time in Gohan's life that he had experienced such a difficult battle. It was also the first time that Gohan had fought with an opponent for more than 1,000 moves. Before this, Gohan had never fought for such a long time. The reason was very simple. The moves that the Victory Sword used were completely Gohan's move. Whatever move Gohan used, the Victory Sword used the same move. The moves between the two of them were not different at all. The Victory Sword's proficiency and standard were even higher than Gohan's. If he had not used I Ching's body to experience the power of heaven that surpassed the Emperor Sword level, Gohan might not have been a match for the Victory Sword. To Gohan, this was like fighting with another him. Of course, it would become a stalemate and they would be equally matched. Are you the Victory Sword or Gu Xianyuan? After pondering quietly for a while, Gohan suddenly asked the Victory Sword, who was standing beside him. Obviously, Gohan had figured out the problem. If the Victory Sword had merged with the identity of Gu Xianyuan when he became Gu Xianyuan, it was equivalent to becoming the Victory Sword. It was just that the body of Gu Xianyuan had become independent from his body and had become an independent personality. Therefore, all the sword techniques that he had mastered when he was Gu Xianyuan were naturally mastered by the Victory Sword. The Victory Sword was the complete manifestation of Gu Xianyuan. Therefore, the previous Victory Sword no longer existed. Not only had its appearance changed, but even its terrible sword techniques had changed. The previous sword lady, who was the last in the immortal sword tier, had completely disappeared. This is up to you, Master. If you wish for me to be the Sword of Victory, then I will still be the Sword of Victory. If Master wishes for me to be Gu Xian's fate, then I will still be Gu Xian's fate. The Victory Sword replied calmly in response to Gohan's question. What if I let you choose? Gohan once again threw the question back at Victory Sword. Actually, after fusing with Gu Xianyuan's identity, I can no longer remember the original memories of the Victory Sword. I can only vaguely remember where my origin came from. If Master really gives me the power to decide, then I hope that I can exist as Gu Yuanyuan, the Victory Sword said after hesitating for a long time. Then you can be a good friend. Gohan nodded, and an idea flashed in his mind. He then said, we might as well throw away the name Sword of Victory. From today onwards, you'll be called the Xianyuan Sword. Well, Gohan, this crazy renaming demon, after helping the king of Yugo-Jian's sword change its name to Chi-Dian Sword, he also conveniently changed the name of the Sword of Victory. Xian Yuan sword. Hearing Gohan's words, the victory sword. Oh no. Xian Yuan's sword's face revealed a trace of a satisfied smile. Obviously, it was very satisfied with this new name. Time passed by in an orderly manner. During the day, Gohan arranged for the poor Lu Shihua to challenge Pikachu, and then sent Lu Shihua, who had turned into charcoal, to the medical chamber time and time again. At night, it was time for Gohan's small class. All the sword ladies felt that their lives had become incomparably fulfilling, except for our poor Lu Shihua. However, after a week of training, Lu Shihua finally gradually improved. She no longer couldn't kill a Pikachu and would be electrocuted by the opponent, unable to move until she was on the verge of death. Firstly, because Lu Shihua's agility had greatly increased, the Pikachu's electric shock could no longer hit her in one hit. Lu Shihua could already rely on her own movement and speed to avoid the Pikachu's electric shock. After all, Lu Shihua was a spirit sword level sword wielder, and her speed was much faster than the Pikachu. Secondly, because Lu Shihua had gradually adapted to the feeling of electric shock, her body began to have the ability to resist paralysis. Even if she was directly electrocuted, she wouldn't be completely paralyzed and unable to move, but her movements would become very slow. And most importantly, Lu Shihua had already mastered the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of spring, swordsmanship. She could open a sword chi shield and rely on her own sword chi shield to block the Pikachu's electric shock. However, because the sword of spring could only block one side at most, once the number of Pikachu increased, the electric shock would attack from all directions, and the sword of spring would no longer be that useful. With the support of these 3 abilities, the Pikachu's seemingly invulnerable electric shock net was drilled a big hole by Lu Shihua. As long as Lu Shihua could get close to the Pikachu group, she could use the 8-winged seraphim sword in her hand to send a few unlucky Pikachu back into the dimensional vortex. But that was all. As he got closer to the Pikachu, the accuracy of the electric shocks became higher and higher, and the voltage of the electric shocks also became greater. After killing 1 or 2 Pikachu, Lu Shihua would be electrocuted to the ground again, and he would once again experience the feeling of being turned into a piece of charcoal. However, with every battle, Lu Shihua's strength would increase. According to Gohan's estimation, Lu Shihua would only need another month at most before these hundreds of Pikachu would be killed by Lu Shihua, and Lu Shihua would be able to successfully obtain the title of Pikachu Killer. But the problem was that the Pikachu weren't fools. After discovering that there were casualties in their tribe every day, the entire Pikachu tribe decided to move away from this dangerous place after Pika 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 Pika. It was a pity that they did not know how difficult of an opponent they had provoked. Gohan and the rest followed behind the Pikachu tribe like shadows, and every day there were still Pikachu that suffered under Lu Shihua's hands. Seeing that their companions were still dying, the angry and horrified Pikachu group finally decided to band together for warmth. No matter what, they wouldn't send out a small team to leave the group. The remaining 200-plus Pikachu were all tightly united. They foraged together and rested together. Even if they were alone, they wouldn't leave the group. They wanted to borrow the group's strength to protect themselves. This was undoubtedly a huge problem for Lu Shihua. Lu Shihua could easily handle a group of several dozen Pikachu, but the current Lu Shihua definitely couldn't withstand the ocean-like electric shock of more than 200 Pikachu hugging together. Very good. Just what I wanted. Seeing this scene, not only was Gohan not worried, a satisfied smile appeared on his face instead. Actually, before this, Gohan had already discovered that after adapting to the Pikachu's electric shock and gaining resistance to paralysis, the improvement of Lu Shihua's swordsmanship and movement technique with several dozen Pikachu had become less and less. In that case, perhaps 200 Pikachu would be the best assistance to help Lu Shihua break out of the cocoon and become a butterfly. So, Gohan patted Lu Shihua's shoulder and said to this good disciple of his, that made her feel the most despair in her life, I'll change your trial method. From now on, your goal is to charge into the Pikachu group. Survive for 20 minutes without harming a single Pikachu and ensuring that your personal shield doesn't shatter. What? Lu Shihua was so scared that her limbs went limp on the spot. This meant that she had to perfectly dodge the attacks of more than 200 Pikachu within 20 minutes. Lu Shihua suddenly felt that she would be wasting her entire life competing with these Pikachu. Master, this is simply impossible. Do you hate your disciple? Your disciple really can't do it. After 2 weeks of cultivation, Lu Shihua finally threw a tantrum with Guhan for the first time. This was because in Lu Shihua's heart, this was simply impossible. What did you say? Hearing Lu Shihua's complaint, Guhan coldly glared at Lu Shihua. Lu Shihua jumped in fright and immediately lowered her head, not daring to say another word. Forget it. Didn't you say that it was impossible? Guhan snorted coldly. Fine, then I'll let you see if this is something impossible. After saying this, Guhan walked directly into the group of more than 200 Pikachu under Lu Shihua's witness. Pika! Pika! The moment Guhan appeared, all of the Pikachu had already noticed Guhan's presence. Their small cheeks that were as red as apples began to flicker with golden lightning. When Guhan entered the Pikachu's attack range, these lightning bolts all exploded in an instant, forming a lightning bolt as thick as a train. With lightning speed, it struck towards Guhan at lightning speed. Wait! The moment the lightning bolt struck, Guhan's figure appeared in another position as if he had teleported. Naturally, the thick lightning bolt could only hit an unlucky pine tree nearby, charring it in an instant. The Pikachu were actually stunned for a moment. They didn't seem to think that the attack they were so proud of would be so easily dodged by their opponent. Feeling indignant, they gathered their lightning bolts again and launched a few more lightning bolts at Guhan, but Guhan easily dodged all of them. As a result, the Pikachu decided to change their strategy. They no longer combined the lightning bolts together, but used each individual as a unit. More than 200 lightning bolts struck towards Guhan at the same time. It felt like a large net made of lightning bolts, leaving no space to dodge. Unfortunately, since it was a net, there would definitely be holes in it. Although the holes in the net were very small, for an expert like Guhan, a small gap was enough. Guhan was like a graceful butterfly, nimbly shuttling through the countless lightning bolts. Even though the Pikachu had already exerted their strength to the extreme, not a single lightning bolt could hit Guhan's body. The last 20 minutes hadn't passed yet. Instead, it was the Pikachu who had exhausted the electricity in their bodies. Seeing that they had no chance of harming Guhan, and that Guhan didn't take the initiative to hurt them, they simply stuck out their butts and ignored Guhan. On the other side, Lu Shihua's eyes were already glued to the scene. Chapter 1362. Lu Shihua and Lu Yin watched dumbfoundedly as their master walked back. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they would never have imagined that there was someone in this world who could pass through a thunderstorm without being touched by any electricity. What was even more terrifying was that Guhan didn't even use the defensive sword technique, Sword of Spring, from the beginning to the end. He completely relied on his own movement technique to dodge. Lu Shihua felt that the word human could no longer be used to describe Guhan. It's your turn. Guhan didn't give Lu Shihua any chance to prepare. After he left the Pikachu pack, he immediately went to Lu Shihua's side and threw her into the Pikachu pack. Lu Shihua's body was instantly drenched in sweat. She was extremely frightened, panicked, and vigilant as she looked at the Pikachu around her. Just as she was about to focus all her attention to avoid them, something unexpected happened to Lu Shihua. The surrounding Pikachu all powerlessly collapsed to the ground, lazily looking at Lu Shihua. They didn't have the slightest intention of giving Lu Shihua an electric rain. Occasionally, 1 or 2 Pikachu would attack Lu Shihua, but their electric currents didn't even extend a few meters before they ran out of voltage and disappeared into thin air. Lu Shihua stayed in the large pack of Pikachu for a few minutes. She looked at Gohan helplessly and said, "Master, it's not that your disciple isn't working hard, but these Pikachu aren't good enough. I almost forgot. I've already used up all the electricity in these Pikachu's bodies." Gohan came to a sudden realization. It seemed like he had acted a little too ruthlessly and squeezed out all the pitiful Pikachu. No, time is precious. I have to think of a way to restore these Pikachu's vitality. After thinking for a while, Gohan took out a large nuclear battery from his dimensional pocket. This large nuclear battery was originally used by Gohan to supply electricity to his campsite. According to the instructions written on this large nuclear battery, this power was enough to supply a household that consumed 100 kilowatts of electricity daily for 500 years. Although he didn't know whether the manual was boasting or not, it should be enough to supply the Pikachu with their daily electricity needs. Hence, Gohan immediately got to work himself. He found some wires and connected them to the positive and negative poles of the large core energy battery. Then, he adjusted the battery's voltage to the highest 1200 volt. After that, he brought the large core energy battery and walked into the crowd of Pikachu. He casually grabbed a fallen Pikachu. When this Pikachu saw Gohan's hand grabbing towards him, his face immediately revealed a terrified expression. He used the last bit of strength in his body to escape. But how could it possibly escape from Gohan's grasp? In less than a second, Gohan caught its tail and pulled it back forcefully. The entire Pikachu fell completely into Gohan's hands. "Pick up, Pikachu!" Witnessing their friends being captured by the enemy, the Pikachu tribe who had collapsed powerlessly on the ground struggled to stand up. Their apple-like little faces once again emitted scorching electric sparks, as though intending to exhaust the last of their strength to battle against Gohan. However, Gohan didn't care about these Pikachu's behavior at all. He grabbed the two positive and negative wires, one red and one blue, from the large nuclear battery, and stuck them on both sides of Pikachu's cheek. A golden electric current instantly flashed across the apple muscles of the Pikachu. The Pikachu that appeared incomparably resistant and fearful from being grabbed by Gohan instantly changed its expression. It was brimming with comfort, as if it was soaking in a hot bath. "Looks like it's effective." Seeing this Pikachu's reaction, Gohan nodded in satisfaction. It seemed like his recharging plan was successful. After discovering that their companions didn't seem to encounter any hostile treatment, the Pikachu that had used the last of their energy to prepare for battle fell back to the ground, preparing to recharge the electricity in their bodies. According to their physical qualities, they would probably need at least 3 days to recharge their electricity to its fullest state. "Come, grab it yourself." Gohan didn't have the time to help Pikachu hold the wires. He directly stuffed the red and blue wires into Pikachu's small hands. Moreover, the ends of the wires on Pikachu's face fell at the same time. "Pick up." The Pikachu that was originally enjoying a hot bath suddenly realized that the source of comfort was gone. It immediately revealed a somewhat uncomfortable expression. However, Pikachu was Yuan-ko with a certain level of intelligence. When it realized that the red and blue wires were held in its hands, it instinctively imitated Gohan's actions and stuck the two ends of the wires back to its apple muscles. Pikachu once again let out a comfortable moan. It also became the first Pikachu in the Pikachu tribe to learn how to recharge itself. Next, Gohan caught another 9 Pikachu and taught them to recharge themselves according to the teaching method of the first Pikachu. Then, he left the Pikachu tribe and silently stayed at the side to observe these Pikachu's next actions. After about 10 minutes, the first Pikachu suddenly threw away the wires in its hands energetically. Then, it said to its other dispirited companion, "Pick up, pick up." After speaking for a long time, that Pikachu finally imitated its companion skeptically. It grabbed the red and blue wires and stuck them to its apple muscles. What happened next was natural. The entire Pikachu tribe began to gather around this large nuclear battery. their small eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation as they looked at their companions who were recharging. Once one of their companions finished recharging, the next Pikachu would immediately jump up to take over. What surprised Gohan was that although there were many Pikachu, there were no disputes. All the Pikachu were orderly waiting for their companions. So cute! Lu Shihua couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when he saw these cute Pikachu lining up. How cute! It's just some Yuan-ko. It'll take at least a day for them to recharge. Then, you'll have to train with me today. Gohan knocked on Lu Shihua's head. Lu Shihua, who had a pained expression, could only accept Gohan's training for a whole day. The next day, when Lu Shihua walked into the Pikachu tribe with a heart full of apprehension, he immediately enjoyed the warm reception of the Pikachu who had been recharging for a whole day. Countless electric shocks fell around Lu Shihua. Lu Shihua barely dodged for a few seconds before he was electrocuted to the ground. He didn't know how many times in his life he had turned into a piece of charcoal. What was worth mentioning was that when Gohan finally walked into the Pikachu tribe to save Lu Shihua, all the Pikachu stopped electrocuting at the same time and gave Gohan a kind smile. It seemed that these Pikachu had already recognized Gohan as the good person who kindly provided them with a power bank yesterday. This was unexpected for Gohan, who was originally prepared to properly practice his body technique. However, thanks to the Pikachu's cooperation, Gohan very easily rescued Lu Shihua in time. And in this one day, Lu Shihua was electrocuted into charcoal a total of 7 times. It was simply a hellish experience. On the second day, when Lu Shihua mustered up his courage and walked into the Pikachu tribe again, the Pikachu tribe suddenly turned a blind eye to Lu Shihua. They were also too lazy to waste the electricity in their bodies to electrocute Lu Shihua. This was also a very normal thing. Facing this guy who couldn't be electrocuted to death and appeared in front of them again and again, the Pikachu should also accept their fate. Although the Pikachu had accepted their fate, Gohan wasn't happy. Thus, Gohan decisively forcibly took away the large nuclear battery, and then let Lu Shihua enter the Pikachu tribe, who had become incomparably anxious because they lost the large nuclear battery. And the anxious Pikachu once again electrocuted Lu Shihua into charcoal. Thus, Gohan, whose objective was satisfied, returned the large nuclear battery to the Pikachu tribe. This happened a few times, and the Pikachu tribe finally understood a fact. That was, only by electrocuting Lu Shihua could they obtain the right to use the power bank. Thus, Lu Shihua's tragic fate ushered in its own climax. In order to protect the extremely precious power bank of their tribe, the Pikachu tribe used up all their strength in order to electrocute Lu Shihua to his heart's content. After a few more days, Lu Shihua discovered that the medical resources in his and Gohan's medical pods had been completely depleted. The medical pods could no longer function normally and treat their bodies. This was a very normal thing. After all, the designers of the medical pods would never have imagined that someone would enter the medical pods as many as 7 or 8 times a day. No matter how many medical resources there were in the medical pods, it wasn't enough for such consumption. Faced with the situation of depleted medical resources, not only did Lu Shihua not feel any sorrow, but he instead became somewhat excited and happy. If the medical pods couldn't function normally, did that mean that his extremely tragic training was over? After all, Gohan couldn't really disregard his own safety. Unfortunately, Lu Shihua was wrong. When Gohan took out a bottle of Emperor's blood from his dimensional pocket and dripped a quarter of it into Lu Shihua's mouth, Lu Shihua completely recovered in a short 3 minutes. After that, Lu Shihua completely lost all hope for his future life. With the support of the Emperor's blood, the number of times Lu Shihua was electrocuted into charcoal per day instantly increased from 8 to 30 times. If it wasn't for the fact that the Pikachu's charging speed couldn't keep up with the discharge speed, Gohan would probably let Lu Shihua be electrocuted 80 times a day. Although these were extremely painful days for Lu Shihua, he had to admit that Lu Shihua's body technique improved by leaps and bounds in the process of dodging time and time again. After a week, Lu Shihua was able to dodge for 30 seconds. After half a month, Lu Shihua could already last for 3 minutes. After a month and a half, Lu Shihua's movements in the Pikachu had become like a ghost. Although it still couldn't compare to Gohan's body technique, Lu Shihua's goal of lasting in the Pikachu for 20 minutes was already achieved. Gohan could feel that a monster like him was slowly taking shape under his guidance. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.